Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Ethan couldn't sleep. His life had been eventful lately. But what had happened today? It just didn't make sense. How is that possible? Ethan realized he was smiling again. Wow! He'd long ago forgotten about that orphan boy. The orphan boy, the one who'd ended up in his ward, but fate had turned around. The street lamp shone brightly through the window, so that every object in the ward was clearly visible, including the half-empty box of chocolates. Ethan himself had forgotten that he had once adored these candies, and he hadn't seen them on sale for a long time. But there was a man on earth who remembered his little weakness and even found the box to please Ethan. So everything was not in vain. The penny wages, delays at work, and hard labor. Sometimes he wanted to quit his position as a doctor in the district hospital and go to a more monetary job, but something kept stopping him. Ethan couldn't leave his colleagues and patients. He just couldn't. He scolded himself for it, but continued to stay at his post. Even when a childhood friend opened an automobile workshop and called him to be an administrator, offering a good salary, even when his wife called him a loser, even when his daughter was born and the four of us in a two-room apartment became cramped. It seemed to Ethan that leaving his position as head of the pulmonology department was tantamount to betrayal. He joined the hospital right after residency. At first, he worked under the supervision of an experienced doctor. Then he began to manage patients himself, and gradually it became clear that Ethan had developed some kind of sixth sense. He had a special instinct that helped him diagnose and select the right treatment. A special category of patients were children. Actually, there was a special department for young patients, but it was often overcrowded, so the small charges came to Ethan's floor. Now such cases have become isolated, but earlier, when the hospital was smaller, children came to Ethan's floor regularly. And just today, being in the unusual role of a patient himself, Ethan remembered one of his little patients, a boy of about 12 to 13 years old from the orphanage, who came to the hospital with pneumonia. Of course, he remembered it for a reason, of course. There had been 1,000 patients in his department over the years of his work, of course. You can't keep everyone in your memory. But Daniel was special and reminded of himself in a very surprising way. Ethan was still a young specialist at the time, but already respected and authoritative. His opinion was considered. He was consulted by more experienced colleagues. By that time, Ethan realized that he had chosen the right path: pulmonology. People with various diseases of the respiratory system, blue lips, pale skin, the man over time learned to distinguish his patients from afar, saw them on the street in shopping centers and parks. Ethan made diagnoses, developed appropriate treatment regimens, and put them into practice. Carefully approached each case, and people began to breathe again. The patient's quality of life changed dramatically for the better. The doctor felt great joy when he saw that the former patient was healthy, full of strength, happy, a tremendous return. Unfortunately, not all stories ended well. Ethan immediately noticed patients who did not have much chance of recovery. He recognized it in some subtle way, signs. Daniel, the boy from the orphanage, was one of them. Ethan saw the teenager being processed in the emergency room. Daniel had been brought in by two women, the local internet medic and one of the caretakers, apparently. They were answering questions. The admitting nurse was filling out paperwork, and on the couch, with his back against the wall, sat Daniel, thin, pale, dark blonde bangs falling almost to his eyes, spiky shoulder blades. The boy was taking his temperature, his t-shirt tugging at the thermometer sticking out of his armpit. Ethan didn't like the look in the boy's eyes, a dull, indifferent look that said he was very sick and the chances of recovery were slim. Ethan still remembered how his heart had shrunk with pity for the boy. He decided that he would do whatever he could to get the young patient out. Then there was the examination. Temp under 40, saturation critical, lungs wheezing, labs showing severe inflammation. Ethan was outraged. How did the orphanage bring the child to such a state? Why didn't they seek professional help sooner? The local nurse fed Daniel with useless pills, antipyretics, painkillers, even cough medicine she gave him, but he got worse and worse. Now the boy's situation was critical. X-rays showed pneumonia with extensive lung damage. The young patient was transferred to the intensive care unit, connected to a ventilator, began to administer the necessary drugs. Daniel either fell asleep or lost consciousness. Ethan sat next to him and looked at the skinny teenager, so pale, almost blending in with the white hospital pillowcase. Very young and no longer wanted by anyone. It was evident in his faded gaze and general lack of grooming. An orphan? What can I say? Life in an orphanage is certainly not sugar. Ethan was afraid to leave the boy's side that night. It seemed that in his absence the worst might happen. The child's condition was too unstable. The ward was quiet that night. Old patients were already on the mend, and there were no new arrivals. The nurse on duty looked in several times, offered the doctor to go to the restroom, to lie down, a little, to drink tea. He refused. He could not leave Daniel now. He felt it was dangerous, and he was worried for a reason. At about 4 a.m. the boy got worse. He turned blue, wheezed, and all this without regaining consciousness. Ethan immediately, without a second, called for the help of an on-duty resuscitator, and the two of them several tediously long minutes brought Daniel back to life. The kid was breathing again. The beeping of the instruments was steady as it should be. Ethan exhaled with relief. It was gone. The doctor didn't leave his post until morning, even though he felt that the crisis was over, that the boy was no longer in danger. Daniel's chest rose and fell evenly. At the thought of what would have happened if he hadn't been there at the critical moment, Ethan felt sick to his stomach. He and his wife had recently had a son, a cheeky, funny-looking baby, Mason, now sniffling peacefully in his crib. He and Margaret had surrounded the newborn with love and care, giving him plenty of warmth and attention every day. It seemed that all this is vital for the little man. Mason literally blossomed from their smiles, hugs, warm words, and this Daniel, how does he and others like him live? The boy was in the intensive care unit in the most serious condition, and the adults were to blame for it. By the way, for not sounding the alarm in time, and it was almost 9 a.m. Ethan would soon have to make his rounds, and then hand over his shift to his colleagues, and no one had ever called to ask about the boy's condition. Ethan looked at the boy with pity. It seemed to him that his cheeks had turned a little pink. Just a little, of course. He still had a lot of healing to do, but the crisis was over. There was a chance that he would be all right. Ethan couldn't resist ruffling the young patient's blonde hair. Daniel's recovery had been slow and difficult. The damage to his lungs was very extensive. The boy had difficulty breathing, and he coughed to the point of nausea at the slightest physical exertion. The child was temporarily removed from the ventilator, but the transfer to a regular ward was too much to talk about. Every now and then the kid's saturation dropped sharply, and we had to give him oxygen. Ethan spent a lot of time at the bedside of the little patient. They talked for a long time, if Daniel's condition allowed it. The boy's story about his life in the orphanage shook Ethan, an adult, to the core. Above all, the indifference of the staff was surprising. For example, One day, Daniel told in a mundane tone that he was being bullied by several older teenagers from the orphanage, robbed of food, forced to clean their beds for them, and to be on duty, just clinging. Tripping, insults. Once they even beat Daniel for disobedience, quite severely and brutally, and all this with the tacit consent of the caretakers and nannies. Daniel recounted these egregious incidents simply and naturally, as if they were commonplace, a matter of course. He was not alone in this situation. In the orphanage, it was the norm that the older ones hurt the younger ones. There are those who offend, and there are victims. For the children of the orphanage, it was natural, habitual, routine. There was nowhere to wait for help. The educators turn a blind eye and advise them to deal with it themselves. But how can a physically thin, not strong boy stand up to a crowd of big, angry teenagers? The orphanage staff also invented humiliating punishments for the most seemingly innocent misdemeanors. For example, Daniel once knelt in a corner in the corridor, in his underwear for half a night, just for drawing after bedtime, with a flashlight under a blanket. This was noticed by the duty teacher, and got very angry. On the antics of older and strong those who can already fight back, the staff turned a blind eye. They were allowed to do anything, but on the weak, the adults came off at full speed. From the stories of Daniel, Ethan concluded that the educators banally take out their anger on the children, compensate for their own powerlessness. This, of course, is scary. Daniel did not complain. Ethan learned about the horrors of being in the orphanage by asking leading questions. The boy told about his life, his existence, in an even tone. For him, it was all familiar, natural. The boy did not know that it could be otherwise. One day, Ethan couldn't stand it and wrote a letter to the city administration, without mentioning names and surnames, so as not to frame Daniel. In this note, the man told about what was going on in the walls of the children's institution. Ethan heard that after his appeal, a commission came to the orphanage. Checks were made. The pupils were questioned. Had anything changed then? The doctor did not know the exact answer to this question, but he really hoped that he had helped the little children and Daniel in particular. Gradually, a special, very warm, trusting relationship developed between the patient and the doctor. The boy looked forward to Ethan's arrival in the intensive care ward and smiled at him every time, even if he had no strength at all. The man tried to make the boy laugh, cheer him up, told him anecdotes and funny stories of his childhood. He asked him to get well soon, because a dolphinarium had come to town, and the orphans would definitely be taken there. So Daniel had to be in line by the end of the month. One day, when Ethan went to check on Daniel as usual, the phone rang in his robe pocket. His wife was calling. Margaret had asked him to buy some milk for her and had disconnected. Was that Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata? Daniel inquired. It was, he asked at the ringtone. Beautiful music. You know your classics. Ethan smiled. Are you interested? Or maybe they teach music in your orphanage. I didn't always grow up in an orphanage. Answered the boy. Yes, and I understand that you were transferred there from the maternity hospital. I saw something like that in the documents, or am I wrong? You're not wrong. My real mom gave me up right away. I don't know her and I don't know why she did it, but I was really transferred to the baby house, right from the maternity ward. Ethan's heart squeezed at the thought. He had recently picked up his wife and tiny son from the maternity ward. Guests, balloons, a sea of colors and smiles, relatives and friends joyfully welcoming the new member of the family. It was such an event, such a celebration. The man could hardly hold back the tears of happiness. For the first time, bent the corner of the envelope and looked at the wrinkled red face of the baby. Many beautiful pictures remain from that day, and when Mason grew older, he would look at them with interest. And Daniel, how was he? Probably lying alone, in the ward of refuseniks. They say that such children do not even cry. They understand that no one will come to them anyway. And then, wrapped up in a gray blanket, the boy moved to the baby house, where he was hardly very happy. After all, the appearance of a new child in such an institution means for the staff only an increase in the number of worries. I lived in the orphanage, Daniel continued, remembering almost nothing about that period of my life, and then I was transferred to an orphanage. And from there, when I was about 4 years old, I was adopted by a man and a woman, rich. We lived in a big house, even had a swimming pool. At first, Daniel felt like he was in heaven. The new parents did a lot to educate the child. The boy had a music teacher who gave him piano lessons. His father taught the boy to swim, and now, almost every day, Daniel had a swim in his own pool. The child was taken to the city for soccer lessons. Daniel did not like the training, but not to upset his parents, he pretended to be delighted. And he tried very hard to be praised by coaches and teachers. Let his parents know that they had chosen him for a reason, Daniel. He wanted to be the perfect son for them, or they might bring him back. Daniel had his own room, spacious, stylishly furnished, closets bursting with toys and clothes. That's my mother. She loved to go shopping with me, the boy recalled. My father worked all day long, and here she is. With her, we sometimes spent many hours in a row in shopping centers. Most of the time, we had one of her friends with kids around my age with us. It was torture, to be honest. Daniel didn't share his foster mother's love of shopping. He tried on suits in the clothing departments without complaint. He waited for his mother when she picked out outfits and bags for herself, sat in cafes listening to his mother's boring, long conversations with her friends. He was sent off to play with the children of his friends on the playground, but Daniel could not get along with them. For some reason, the children teased him, insulted him, pinched him, and all this in a sneaky way, and their games were boring and uninteresting. The boy avoided contacts with these so-called friends as much as he could. His mother noticed something wrong and reprimanded her adopted son, calling him an outcast and other incomprehensible words. The mother's displeasure was the most frightening thing for Daniel at that time. He wanted to feel loved and needed. He wanted to give joy to his foster parents, and when it did not work, he was upset and very afraid that he would be taken back. Daniel hoped that time would pass and he would be loved, but the years passed and the situation did not change on the face of the foster mother. More and more often appeared half-squeamish expression when looking at her son. She quickly grew tired of him, tried to avoid communication by all means. The father, he was almost absent from the child's life. The man was constantly working to provide the family with a comfortable existence. He noticed his son only when he achieved any success. For example, Daniel received his father's sincere praise when he won a music competition at school, performing the best in his age group, a difficult piece, or when only once, Daniel was recognized as the first player of a soccer match and awarded him a gold-plated statuette. The father, glowing with pride, took pictures of his successful son and put his arm around the boy's shoulders. The rest of the time, the man just didn't notice Daniel. Ethan listened and wondered. Daniel had been adopted. He'd grown up in a family for a while. But in fact, nothing had changed for him there. The same indifference, the same dislike. Only the setting was different. A palace with a swimming pool instead of shabby gray walls. She didn't know I could hear, but I did. Sharing my feelings with Ethan Daniel, the boy's voice trembling. It was obvious that the boy had never told his story to anyone, and now he was relieved to be able to tell it to someone who cared about him. She is mine, not a real mother. She told my father that I irritate and tire her, that she can no longer see me, that I am capricious, that I bore her. Wow. What did he say? He said there's no going back, and that she shouldn't whine, especially because I'm almost always handled by the nanny, not her. And that a child wasn't a toy to be played with and left behind, and his mother had rebuked him, saying that he wasn't particularly eager to hang out with his son, and so on. Daniel remembered that one day anger settled in him, and he began to do terrible things to piss off the foster mother, to see on her face some emotion, indifference, coldness. The boy couldn't stand it any longer. From a docile and calm child, Daniel turned into a devil. He deliberately broke and damaged things, rude to adults, stopped obeying their instructions. Once he shook the contents of his mother's purse right into the pool for refusing to take him to a birthday party. It wasn't that Daniel wanted to go, he just needed an excuse for another prank. His mother had beaten him for the first time, slapping his cheeks, slapping his back a little lower. It didn't hurt at all. He'd gotten it worse at the orphanage. Daniel laughed in her face and was surprised to see fear in the woman's eyes, in addition to anger and annoyance. She was afraid of him. That's how she discovered him. More on that next. Daniel poured into the sink the contents of the beautiful bottles of his father's bar, ruined with Scissor's designer dress mother, in which she was going to go to the corporate party to her husband. He let the family's favorite parrot, Jocko, out of his cage. The bird flew off to an unknown destination and never returned. Scattered garbage from a bucket all over the house, poured paint into the pool, trampled some flower beds in the garden. Daniel invented more and more pranks to piss off his parents, to draw attention to himself. He got punished for it, but the boy wasn't afraid of punishment. It was like he was possessed by a demon. I think I was getting back at them then. Ethan confessed to Daniel. I'm ashamed of my behavior now. It wasn't their fault that they couldn't love me, but I was so disappointed. All my dreams of a loving, happy family were shattered. I tried so hard to please them. I tried to make music and go to soccer. This hateful went too, and tolerated shopping trips. But they, especially her, they looked at me like something unpleasant, unnecessary. So I took my revenge on them. Daniel was taken to the doctor, preceded by a serious conversation between the couple. The boy heard everything from his bedroom. What doctor? The father was indignant. So that everyone thinks that my child is abnormal? Yes, you just dissolved it. Not for nothing you cannot have children of their own. You just do not know how to communicate with them. I told you motherhood wasn't for you. No, you wanted a doll for yourself. That's it. Now you've got it, so raise it instead of going to the salons. He is crazy. My mother screamed. You're never home. Can't you see what he's doing? And if one night he'll just send us all to the other side of the world. Didn't you think of that? The parents argued for a long time. They talked about Daniel as a problem to be solved. They weren't frightened by their son's condition and didn't really care about his fate. The father did not want a child with a diagnosis in the family. The mother, on the other hand, hoped to get a diagnosis and send the unwanted child to the hospital, at least for a while, to breathe free. And that's when I clearly realized what a burden I was to both of them. Daniel shook his head sadly and realized that they didn't need me, that they would never love me, so he calmed down, accepted the situation, decided to take it as it came. Ethan shivers. Daniel was about 7 years old then, a very young child, and already such problems, such thoughts. Daniel left his antics, but it was too late. His mother took the boy to a doctor, a paid one, a very expensive one, who was determined to fulfill any wish of the client, and the mother's wish was absolutely clear: to get a diagnosis, so that she could legally dump the boy where he came from, in an orphanage. That's how I became a mentally unhealthy person. Daniel said words that were not appropriate for his age. My mother screamed at the head of the orphanage that they had given them a crazy person and promised to deal with them. And I was assigned a health group, with which usually no one takes children in the family who needs such a big child, and even with a frightening diagnosis. So now I live in a boarding school. I can't wait to grow up. Do you want to become an adult sooner? Asked Ethan, shocked by the young patient's story. Of course they are children. That is, we are weak, defenseless, powerless. Nobody counts us. Adults are different. When I am big and rich, I will definitely take a child from an orphanage, or even 2 or 3, as many as my wife allows, and I will be a real dad to them. I'll always talk to them and fulfill their wishes. Ethan smiled. Daniel, in spite of what he had to endure, was not embittered. That boy had a surprisingly good heart. He'd been betrayed twice, he'd had a hard time in the orphanage, and he didn't even hold a grudge against his foster parents. On the contrary, he was grateful for a few years spent in their beautiful rich house. It was only there that I realized I had talent. Daniel smiled. His breath was getting short, and his lips were turning slightly blue from the long conversation. Ethan noted these warning signs and prepared to call the nurse for oxygen, but he still wanted to finish the conversation, especially since Daniel himself was interested in it. What talent have you discovered? I draw well, especially buildings, constructions. I see. I immediately grasped the essence. Even when I was very young, I was able to draw 3-dimensional images. Even my mother praised me. Here, let's get well soon. We'll transfer you to the ward. I'll bring you pencils and a sketchbook, and draw me something to remember. Okay, sure, Daniel promised. Ethan left the room and thought about it. The boy's condition had stabilized, but the light, too extensive lesions. A drug, very expensive and rare, was needed for recovery. Without this drug, irreparable things could happen to the child. The same day, the doctor contacted the orphanage management and explained the situation. Treat with what you have. The head of the orphanage cut him off. Our budget does not include such items. You understand, the lung damage is so great that there is no way without this medicine. I will provide all the necessary reports and documents. Push for funding. The drug is necessary and urgent. It is not included in the list of those paid from the budget. The superintendent stood her ground. Ethan hung up. Everything was clear with them. Nobody needed this pale, russet-haired Daniel, the artist. If he suddenly disappeared, perhaps nobody would notice or be upset. Complete indifference to the fate of the pupil. Trying to get something from the administration of the orphanage is like banging your head against a concrete wall. Ethan tried to apply to the fund for helping sick children, but even here he met an obstacle. The man never fully understood why, but the fact that Daniel is an orphanage resident played against him. The boy is under the care of the state, which means that it should pay for his treatment. Funds collected money for treatment of only domestic children, family children, a terrible injustice. Total indifference to Daniel's fate depressed Ethan. The boy was getting worse and worse, and the relief was temporary. Standard medications were no longer working, and Daniel was put back on ventilator. The boy was melting every day. Ethan could not bear to watch it, and the man made up his mind. He withdrew the money he had been saving for a new car and bought drugs for Daniel without even consulting his wife, because Margaret, although she was a kind, warm-hearted woman, would not understand or approve of this act. Ethan decided that he would make amends. Gradually, he would save from his paycheck and accumulate the necessary amount, but Daniel, Daniel could not wait. At the hospital, Ethan explained to his colleagues that he had found a rich sponsor for the boy, and only one nurse, the elderly Clara, knew where the money actually came from. She happened to see a receipt for the payment, which showed the name of the account holder from which the money had been debited. Ethan smiled and put his finger to his lips, saying not to spread. The old woman nodded and hugged the young doctor, who himself, being in a bad financial situation, decided to save the boy from inevitable death. Daniel recovered quickly on the new medication. Soon Ethan, with relief, transferred the patient to a regular ward. The boy had fun. He was happy to communicate with the medical staff and other patients. Laughing a lot, Ethan looked at all this and realized he had made the right choice. If it wasn't for the medication, none of this would have happened. No Daniel smiles, no fun games, no amazing drawings. Ethan kept his promise. He brought a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils to the kid's room. That same day, Daniel found the doctor on the floor and demonstrated the drawing. Ethan did not expect such a thing. In front of him was a surprisingly accurate image of a piece of the street, seen from the window of the boy's room, a wide boulevard, the building of a shopping center, passers-by hurrying somewhere. You drew this yourself?" "Of course I did," Daniel answered, clearly pleased with the doctor's reaction. "Wow, you really are a talent." When Daniel said he was good at drawing, Ethan had envisioned something a little different. He'd expected a beautiful, but still childlike and primitive drawing, but here it was as if a professional artist had done the work. The shadows, the light, the volume, the image looked surprisingly lifelike and realistic. "Did someone teach you?" Ethan asked, still not believing his eyes. "Did your foster parents take you to art school?" "No." Daniel shook his head. They wanted their son to be a star soccer player, not an artist. And in the orphanage we have drawing, but it's boring. They put a vase in front of you and tell you to draw. I draw what I see and what I like. You have to study. You have to study. Do you hear me? I'll talk to your teachers." "Thank you. Maybe they'll listen to you, because they want me to study to be a tiler. After the 9th grade, I heard, and I dream of being an artist or even an architect. I like to design buildings." "An architect?" Ethan grinned sadly. "I don't think that would be a career for a kid from an orphanage. There's no way he's going to get into architecture schools, and no one will pay for his studies." It was a pity. The boy was really very talented. Christmas was approaching. It was obvious that Daniel would have to spend it in the hospital. He had a long recovery ahead of him. The boy was glad of that. He liked it in the hospital. He got along well with the locals, and he was especially reluctant to part with his new friend, Ethan, the doctor, the first adult who had ever cared for him. Ethan realized that he had grown attached to the boy. Of course, he couldn't do that, but he couldn't help it. After the hospital, Daniel would have to go back to his old life, full of danger, punishment, indifference, and cold. The man wanted to give this boy at least a little warmth and care as long as he can do it. Therefore, the doctor decided to please the boy for Christmas, to present Daniel something that will definitely make him happy. It should not be some faceless surprise like a set of sweets. Once Ethan found himself with his wife and son in a children's store. The baby was growing so fast, he needed to update his closet. While Margaret and Mason wandered among the clothing departments, Ethan strolled by the racks of toys. There were robots and interactive animals and sets for creativity. The eyes were scattered, and then the man's eyes fell on a big box, a young architect's constructor, sets of blocks from which you can assemble fanciful constructions. There was even decor, tiny shrubs, trees, parts for fountains, and the like interesting little things. Ethan remembered Daniel's words that he liked to invent interesting buildings and realized that this constructor was just made for a young, talented patient. The price, of course, was a biting price, but his wife smilingly approved of her husband's decision, and they bought this brightly colored box. What joy Daniel's eyes lit up when Ethan presented him with the gift. It was the day before Christmas, after the doctor had given the post to the morning shift. Ethan would spend the holiday with his family, but afterward, he would be sure to bring Daniel and his ward roommates treats from the holiday table. Margaret has prepared enough for the whole hospital. Now Daniel spent his mornings and evenings constructing. He turned out really impressive constructions, ergonomic, stylish, aesthetically pleasing. The boy was sure to write down each model in a scrapbook, then dismantle the building and build a new, even more original and interesting. By the time he was discharged, the boy had several albums of such drawings. Ethan once borrowed them and showed them at the Design Center, a prestigious institution where children were taught the basics of architectural design. Classes in the studio were expensive. Students participated in all sorts of competitions and won prizes. But Daniel was ready to accept for free, just to get such a talented student. Ethan explained the situation, said that the boy was brought up in an orphanage, that no one would promote him, let alone pay for his education and trips to competitions. The director thanked him and promised that he would fix everything, because such talent should not go to waste. Ethan left the Design Center with a light heart. It looked like Daniel was seriously interested in this place. You bet, the boy clearly has a rare gift, and the prestigious institution needs more victories. Daniel will definitely provide them. Now the boy will develop professionally in the right direction. Ethan couldn't wait to tell the teenager about everything. He would be happy. His life would no longer be the same. Daniel was happy, of course, but as the discharge approached, he became sadder and sadder. He didn't want to leave the hospitable wards where he was treated so well. Ethan was also sorry to part with Daniel, as he had grown attached to him during that time. He even had a serious talk with Margaret about taking a boy from the orphanage. Daniel was good, bright, kind, and would be a pleasure to take care of Mason. Ethan was really ready to take Daniel into the family, to become a father, a mentor. Why not? But Margaret was adamantly opposed. Are you crazy? We need to feed our own. Where else can we get another one, especially one so grown up? We probably won't even get one. The apartment is small. The wages are small too. Ethan sighed, of course. His wife was right, but Daniel wouldn't be lost now. Everything will be fine for him. On the eve of discharge, the doctor and the patient had a long conversation. They were sitting in the nurse's lounge, drinking tea with Ethan's favorite candies. The kid appreciated them too. The man tried to set the boy up for a new life, to inspire him. He talked about how important it was for him to work, to develop his talent. He left Daniel his phone number and asked him to call if he had any difficulties. Daniel nodded and smiled, but his eyes were sad and sorrowful. You'll be gone in the morning. Your shift will be over, so we don't have another opportunity to talk, the boy said. Yes, Ethan nodded. You'll be discharged without me. I'm so grateful to you, the boy said, looking seriously into the doctor's eyes. I know you saved my life. Well, I was just doing my job. Ethan shrugged. You did a good job, you made it. Not on my own. I know all about it. Daniel admitted quietly. Tears welled up in his eyes. I should have died. I heard the nurses talking, and you saved me twice. The first time was the night I arrived, when you sat next to my bed and noticed in time that I wasn't feeling well. I was with my eyes closed, but I felt everything, understood everything. knew that you were near me. I was so afraid you'd leave, but you were called many times to rest, but you didn't leave. So you felt everything then? I thought you were unconscious. No, I was conscious, but I just didn't have any energy. It was so hard, so scary, I thought I was dying. I was dying, but you didn't leave me for a minute and saved me, helped me at the right moment. It's a miracle I was there for you. Ethan confessed. Everything really could have ended horribly, but I'm a doctor. It's my duty to save the sick. You just couldn't be left behind. But someone else would have. Exorcised Daniel, and Ethan didn't bother to argue because the kid was right. It was true that a doctor was not obliged to sit at the bedside of a patient in intensive care all night, especially when the condition had been stabilized, but the man felt. With his animal instinct that Daniel should not be left alone at that moment, not at all. But that's not all, the boy continued. I know all this. You bought me that expensive medicine with your own money, and without it I wouldn't exist. But where did you get this information from? The doctor was surprised. Well, I wouldn't want to reveal my sources, but okay. Just promise me that you won't scold anyone. Do I look like a scolder to you? You don't. You're just the opposite. But then you'll have to come clean. Clara blurted it out while she was changing my IVs. She told me. She even cried then. She was so moved by your kindness. Ethan sighed. Clara, information about the financial side of the case, and even more so about Daniel being on the verge of death, was not for children's ears. Thank you. I owe you my life? Without thinking about it. Ethan asked softly. That's what adults owe you. You're a child, you have rights. You have the right to learn, to be safe, to live, to be treated. Adults owe it all to their children, and you've had a hard time, but you can't be in a bad place forever, can you? Your life's gonna change now. You're gonna study. You'll definitely get noticed. Everything will be fine, just don't get sick. Don't be lazy, work, develop. It's a deal. Daniel smiled. Ethan ruffled his blonde hair. That's it. I have to make my evening rounds of the intensive care units. See if there's anyone in urgent need of help. Have a good night's work. Daniel got up from his chair and was about to leave, but at the door he turned around and said, I'll save you too someday. You'll see we'll meet again, and I'll help you in some way for sure. Go to bed already, you lifeguard. Ethan smiled. You don't owe me anything. I was just doing my job. And if you want to thank me, become a successful, wealthy man and help those who are weaker than you. Deal. Daniel nodded seriously and walked out. Good kid. Ethan thought then. Kind, grateful. May he be lucky in life. That was their last meeting before he was discharged. The next time Ethan came to work, Daniel was gone, back at the orphanage. The doctor sincerely hoped that the boy's life would change now, that the director of the design center had managed to reach an agreement with the administration of the orphanage, and Daniel would study in the best institution in the city. The boy certainly deserved it. It's been 15 years. During this time, a lot of things happened in Ethan's life. There were victories and failures at work. The same could be said about his personal life. Ethan and Margaret had a second child, a daughter, Susan. Living in a 2-room apartment became cramped, but there was no money to buy a new apartment. Margaret reproached her husband that he could not part with his hospital and find a better-paid job. All the days in the department, I am alone with the children in the house, so at least bring money, but that's how small things count. We do not see anything. My wife was almost sobbing. Ethan did not even try to argue. There was nothing to object. Margaret is right, but the man could not do anything. It was impossible to abandon the department. Ethan's heart ached for each patient. He did everything to make the percentage of recoveries grow steadily, and the number of medical failures tended to zero. Only not everything was in his hands. Funding was not enough. It was high time to make repairs on the floor, and the equipment needed to be updated, because the XI century was upon us, and they were still using prehistoric devices. Ethan had raised the issue many times at meetings, but it had no effect. There were always more important objects that required urgent injection of funds. "Yes, your ward is fine for now," assured the head doctor. "There in cardiology the roof leaks, and in orthopedics wiring sparked, almost had a fire. Our X-ray machine does not see gross pathologies. The equipment is all old. The walls are shabby, covered with mold. For pulmonology patients, it's dangerous, very dangerous." "Ethan, come on. Can't you see the state of the other wards? It's not the time." Ethan did not give up, submitted applications, wrote to the city administration and the mayor's office, but in response he received either a refusal or empty responses, or even silence. The case has not moved for several years, and one day Ethan called the chief physician to his office. "Well, what happened? Something from the realm of the fantastic." He said cryptically, "What?" Ethan didn't understand. "Well, you've been writing everywhere you can, tried to get funding for the department." "Yeah. Knocked on every door." "I did." "Well, I got through. We've got a sponsor who wants to fund the renovation of the pulmonology department and buy modern equipment for diagnostics, treatment, and rehabilitation." Wow! Ethan couldn't believe his ears. He had long since resigned himself to the fact that his actions were having no effect, and now this. This mysterious patron is asking us for an estimate. I mean, a list of the work, the equipment needed, and so on, to see how much money we need. I'll get to the report right away. Ethan had already started to make a list of the necessary items in his mind, and he couldn't wait to get it down on paper. A worrying thought crept into his head. What if the sponsor changed his mind, or even turned out to be a mistake? This whole situation looked too improbable and even magical. "Don't be modest," the head doctor advised. "Write everything you need and even more, and if they tell you to moderate your ardor, then we'll do it." Ethan wasn't being modest. He wasn't asking for himself. He was asking for the patients. With the help of modern medical equipment, they would be able to save more lives, and in renovated wards, without whitewash and mold on the walls, it would be much easier and more pleasant to recover. To the surprise of Ethan and the head doctor, the sponsor took into account all the wishes and immediately transferred the necessary amount to the hospital account, even without haggling and asking unnecessary questions. On the floor, the repair began. Temporarily, Ethan, his colleagues, and patients had to move to another wing, but it was a pleasant hassle because the department was transforming before our eyes, and almost every day delivered boxes to the warehouse with domestic and imported equipment, the highest quality, the most modern. The renovation was over quickly. Ethan was once again convinced that money solves everything, or almost everything. After the work the department shone with white walls and ceilings, unpleasant odors of mustiness and dampness disappeared. Even being here became more pleasant. And the equipment? Ethan couldn't get enough of the new medical equipment. It was a whole new thing. Now they would be able to turn around. Now the patients would recover faster and easier. The man was heartily grateful to the mysterious sponsor. He wanted to talk to him personally, but the man preferred to remain anonymous. The rich have their own quirks, divorced the chief physician. Our benefactor is in disguise, but what are his reasons? Maybe he sinned a lot while he was building up his capital, and now he's making amends. What do we care about that? We care about the result. Ethan could not agree with the words of the chief. He wanted to thank the sponsor personally, to explain how many lives he had saved by his deed, but the patron of the arts did not want to reveal his identity. Well, his right, of course, but it all seemed very strange to Ethan. At work, the man's soul rested. Fresh repairs, new equipment, all this inspired, lifted his spirits, but at home things were not going so well as he would have liked. Moneyless, not that they were poor at all, Ethan's salary even allowed Margaret not to work. They both made that choice when their daughter was born. His wife would stay at home and take care of the children, and he, the head of the family, would be the sole provider. Margaret honestly fulfilled her duties. The children studied on excellent. The house was always clean and cozy and smelled delicious food. But the role of a provider didn't work out so well. Ethan tried, took part-time jobs, went out to work off the clock, but there was still not enough money for the kind of life Margaret wanted. No, she didn't demand anything supernatural, but she wanted to give her children a decent education, to vacation at sea at least once a year, to drive a new car, not a rusty and constantly breaking down. Ethan could not provide all this for his family, worried, tried to do something, but it did not work. The option of quitting the hospital was not considered at all. It was his department, his brainchild. Under him it began to flourish, and now, thanks to him, the department became the most modern in the hospital. But Margaret, too, she could understand. Scandals, quarrels, recriminations increased, but Ethan tolerated it. He had nothing to say to his frustrated wife. Mason and Susan grew up. They were no longer babies, but teenagers requiring much more investment, including financial. Mason took an interest in programming, searching for videos on the internet and creating amazing projects with their help. Margaret and Ethan marveled when their son showed them the results of his labor, but they themselves were far from the IT world. He needs to learn. Margaret insisted. He's clearly got a knack for it. He's a real talent. Yeah, good for him. He's a determined kid growing up. Only we parents can kill that talent at the root. What's that? I don't get it, Ethan. The boy must learn. And do you know how much a programming course costs? I just found out we can't afford it. Well, that's too bad, but maybe there's something cheaper. You can't. I called all such institutions in our city, and online schools even looked for. Everywhere the price is about the same, and it is not for us. I'll figure something out. You better try. It's our child's future we're talking about. It's in our hands right now. Imagine the responsibility. Ethan knew Margaret was overreacting. Well, nothing would happen if Mason didn't study at these expensive courses. The boy was doing a lot himself, and he was doing well. And when the time came, he would enter a university, become a student to study to be a professional programmer, and all these circles. Ethan had the feeling that they were nothing more than a way to siphon money from ambitious parents. But the man did not argue with Margaret. She reacted painfully to all financial issues, especially if it also affected the children. One of his colleagues gave Ethan a great idea. It turns out that in their city, there is a free school for young programmers. It is an institution of the state. Graduates receive a certificate giving them permission to work, but to get there, you have to pass entrance tests. It seems to have strong teachers, innovative programs, modern equipment, but they take only the most promising ones. Ethan immediately called the school and signed Mason up for testing. On the appointed day, he took a short leave from work and drove his son to the interview. Mason was worried. The boy really wanted to get on the enrollment list, hoped, made plans. Ethan was encouraging the child. The man was really confident of success. Mason is so enthusiastic. He's been studying a lot. He already knows a few things. Who else to take but him? Mason was tested, told to look at the results in 2 days on the website. After the allotted time, Ethan called Margaret and told her in a distraught voice that their son's name wasn't on the list. She even called the school to find out if there was a mistake, and it was confirmed that Mason had fallen a few points short. They had advised her to study and try to get in next year. Ethan was upset, of course. He thought it was a done deal, but he spoke to his wife in a deliberately cheerful voice. Well, nothing, he's still a young guy. There's time. He'll have time to study. He'll improve his math and English, and then... You don't understand anything. Margaret was indignant. While he's standing here, his peers are moving ahead, and he'll never catch up with them. Do you understand? Never. And you can't pay for a programming course. You're ruining your son's future. After the conversation with Margaret, Ethan walked sad and pensive for a long time. More and more often she reproached him for not earning enough. It was hard to look like such a lowlife in the eyes of his wife, and the children heard it all too. Here Ethan was distracted, the man was at work, and here he is an important and irreplaceable person, and very respected. His opinion and help is needed by someone all the time. No important medical decision is made without him. Ethan went about his usual business, and then, about a week after the incident with the programming school, a strange and very unexpected event happened. Ethan got a call from the school. The administrator informed him as politely as possible that there were a few more budget places on the course, and since Mason had shown high results on the test, he would be enrolled. They asked him to come with documents and fill out some paperwork. Ethan, of course, immediately called his wife back. Margaret was over the moon. The man smiled, imagining how happy Mason himself would be. Some time later, the problem with the salary was solved quite unexpectedly. The city announced a contest for Doctor of the Year. For the first time in my life, it had never happened before. And from the hospital, the head physician nominated Ethan as a contestant. The man tried to resist. He did not like such events, but the chief insisted, saying that the candidate for the head of the pulmonology department, chosen by voting on the hospital's website, patients favored him. They also wrote explanatory comments. Ethan didn't know that there was any voting, but it was very pleasant to read the patients' comments. Once again, the man felt that his work was seen, valued, and appreciated. The most important thing is that during this time they managed to save many lives. No money can measure that, and then the work spun again. Ethan didn't think about the contest. Filled out some form, submitted a photo. Someone from the hospital administration handled the rest. After a while, Ethan was summoned to his office by the head doctor and asked in a mysterious voice if he had a business suit. "Well, I did," Ethan shrugged. "Why?" "Because you're the winner of the contest." The head doctor's eyes were burning. If only such an honor for the hospital, now it will be easier to get funding from the budget and the long-awaited repair of some departments. I did nothing to win. Ethan, who had forgotten all about the contest, stretched out in confusion. He couldn't believe it was true. You didn't do anything to win the contest, but you did more important things, working, giving of yourself to patients, saving people. That's why you won. At the awards ceremony, Ethan came in glowing Margaret, his wife holding his hand. She looked gorgeous in a dress with an open back, specially purchased for the occasion. Ethan also looked good in the elegant suit he had last worn 5 years ago for the wedding of his wife's younger brother. He was called to the stage. Ethan was a little confused in the spotlight, but as his friends and colleagues told him later, it looked very appropriate, and the Doctor of the Year was not bad at all. It turns out that when you stand on the stage, because of the bright light, you can hardly see the audience hall. It seems dark and boundless sea. Ethan felt the eyes on himself, felt the energy of the audience, but did not see them. Such a strange feeling. And then there was a banquet, at which the tipsy, cheerful head doctor announced important news. It turned out that the winner of the contest would receive a monthly supplement to his salary from the budget, and named such an amount that Margaret shrieked with joy, and Ethan smiled. No longer would he feel like a man who could not provide a decent life for his family. Ethan had often wondered if fate had favored him in some special way lately. He always thought that life was striped. The black stripes would be replaced by white ones, and vice versa. But his phase of success and rise was not over. One success followed another. It certainly pleased, inspired, made him feel strong and almost omnipotent, but also caused a strange feeling. Is everything really working out so well? Was it somehow suspicious in itself? Wouldn't there be a reckoning one day? Ethan tried to chase such thoughts away, but occasionally they still seeped in and kept the man at peace. And now it was completely idyllic at home. The family had finally moved into a new, larger apartment, closer to the gymnasium where the children were studying. The couple even had time to make repairs, but how to do? Ethan simply paid for the services of workers, and while the whole family vacationed at the sea, the team turned the apartment with rough finishing into a stylish, beautiful dwelling. True, we had to constantly communicate with the repairman on Skype, to accept the work, to give instructions, but it was a very pleasant hassle. My wife was delighted, but Mason with some sadness remembered how he liked to make repairs in their old apartment when they, as a team, painted the walls themselves, glued wallpaper, and then a long time to clean up and remove construction waste. As it turns out, these actions gave the children a special pleasure. Ethan's life had changed a lot. He didn't even notice when it started, but now everything was completely different. He worked in a state-of-the-art department. His son was studying at a prestigious programming school. They now had a spacious new apartment. As for money, of course, they were not millionaires, but now they did not have to save on food, clothes, entertainment, and it was just wonderful. But probably, Ethan thought too often that everything could not be so smooth and good in life, and waited for some kind of payback or black streak. But he didn't believe in this happy fairy tale, where all the problems were solved as if by themselves. That evening, Ethan returned from the hospital late. His shift was over at 6 p.m., but he had to stay late, a complicated patient of uncertain prospects. Ethan couldn't leave him until he knew exactly what was wrong. And now, at almost midnight, he was driving along a half-empty country highway, so it was faster than looping through the city, and the route itself was easier, no traffic lights or crosswalks. I could relax a little, which is very helpful when I was in the hospital for 10 hours in a row. It was raining. The drops were drumming on the roof, smashing beautifully against the windshield. The wipers barely coped with their task. I could hardly wait to get home to warmth and comfort. Surely Margaret must have cooked something delicious. Now he was always greeted by a satisfied, smiling wife, not an irritated woman with anxious eyes. A marvelous metamorphosis. And then there was a noise, a rumble, a squeal of brakes, and a strong, powerful, unexpected blow. It came from the right. Ethan felt that he was losing control. He twisted the steering wheel to the right, but it was inexorably carried to the left into the ditch. The car spun. Everything was happening fast. The man saw the sky and the earth change places before his eyes, making him nauseous. Ethan hit the roof and the side windows of the car, but somehow he felt no pain. He wished this fall and his surroundings would end sooner, to get out on solid ground where there was no jolt. Finally, the car came to a stop. Ethan realized that he was trapped in a crumpled car, which had fallen into a ditch with the roof down. The situation was made worse by the fact that a fire was starting. Ethan first smelled a distinctive odor, and then flames appeared as they quietly flared up in the back of the car, but it didn't take long for the fire to spread throughout the cabin. Ethan was bombarded with a wave of terror. There was a need for action. The man tried to free himself, but it was useless. The belt held tight, the doors were jammed, and his hands were not obeying well for some reason. They're strangely sticky and slippery. It's blood. Where's it coming from? Okay, he'll figure it out later. If there is one, it's later. Ethan tried to break the window with what he could find, his son's plastic tube. Of course, he really realized that he was unlikely to succeed, but something had to be done. At the same time, the man loudly called for help. People should see the accident. They would help him. The cabin was quickly filling with smoke. The fire was gaining strength. The characteristic crackle of the flames of the fire eating its food could be heard. A disheveled boy, very young, came to the car. He bent down, made sure that there was a living person in the cabin, tried to open the jammed door, saw the flames. The boy's eyes rounded with fear, and he bounced away to a safe distance. Ethan realized, frightened, realizing what could happen any minute. The boy called for the rescue team, shouting into the phone, his voice breaking, begging them to go faster, but Ethan realized they wouldn't make it. With little time to spare, the man struggled to free himself. He has a life to live, he has children, a wife, he has a job and patients who can't do without him. It was getting harder and harder to breathe. Ethan realized that it was because of the smoke. Soon he would lose consciousness and probably would not even feel anything, but he would lose the opportunity to fight for life. The men joined in. He managed to spot someone else. Someone ran up to the burning car, smashing the windshield. Ethan felt a hail of small shards smashing his face. Or maybe this was all just a hallucination. Strong hands reached out, for the driver wedged between the seat and the dashboard. Then darkness came, saving, calm, impenetrable. Ethan opened his eyes. He had to squeeze his eyes shut. The white walls, the bright light, all of it blinding, preventing him from looking around properly. There was a distinctive beeping sound. Very familiar, there's no mistaking it. He's in the intensive care ward. Maybe even in his own hospital, but in a different ward. Ethan remembered that he had been in an accident, in a burning car, his seat pressed firmly against the dashboard. There was almost no chance of rescue. Did they get him out? Did the rescue team get there in time? Miracles! Then another very important question arose. And what condition was he in? Apparently not in the best condition, since he was in intensive care, and at the same time his head was thinking clearly, which meant that his brain was not particularly damaged. Ethan opened his eyes again. This time he managed to look around. He was alone in the room. Life support equipment was connected to him. He was as he should be without clothes, lying under a thin white sheet. Ethan tried to move his arms, and his legs were working. The man lifted himself slightly and looked under the sheet, his feet bandaged, a few bandages on his body, but everything in place. It looked like things might not be so bad. A familiar nurse entered the room. Ethan had seen her many times in the corridors. They had said hello, but unfortunately he didn't know her name. When the nurse saw that the patient was awake, she smiled happily. "Ethan, are you with us? What a joy! Would you please call James?" Ethan asked, his voice sounding hoarse, somehow weak. He needed to talk to James, the head of the trauma department, and find out about his condition. He felt a little dizzy, a little sore in places, but overall Ethan didn't feel like staying in the ICU. He wanted to go to a regular room. Sure. The nurse nodded and ran for the chief. James arrived promptly, smiling broadly and looking at his colleague, who had been turned into a patient, with obvious relief. Well, what can I say? You were born with your shirt on. You were hit on the highway by an SUV that lost control. The kid behind the wheel was a kid who just got his license yesterday, showing off for his girl. He's fine, but you'll see. All right, he'll get his. Ethan remembered the confused boy who had called the rescue team, begging them to hurry. That must be the one responsible for the accident. For some reason, Ethan didn't feel any anger or even irritation at the character. There was so much fear, despair, remorse in the boy's eyes at that moment. So I was rescued by the rescue team? Did they make it in time? There was a car on fire, not a lifeguard. Rescuer, your guardian angel. A young man was driving down the road, saw the accident. He pulled you right out of the burning car, even though he realized that any minute now something terrible could happen. He didn't hesitate, broke the glass with a fire extinguisher, knocked down the flames a little, freed you from the seat belts with a knife, unfastened the metal with his hands. Just a little bit, but it was enough to pull you out. Your legs were scratched, but it's nothing. And the main thing was not confused and took the fire extinguisher and the knife when he rushed to the rescue. I want to see him. Ethan said, that man, he saved my life at the risk of his own. Yes, he'll come again. James promised. He's sure to, because he calls every day to check on your condition, as often as your relatives do. Every day? How long have I been unconscious? Yeah, almost a week. We were afraid you'd slip into a coma. Sometimes it's hard to know how much brain damage there is, and you were still swollen, but luckily it was okay. I went over the edge a few times. Does Margaret know I'm okay? Well, don't be too quick about it. You've got a lot of healing to do. But I called your wife as soon as I was told. She's probably flying all the way down here by now. Ethan had a lot of time to think at the hospital. The man who had saved him was not out of his mind. He knew they were bound to meet someday, but how can you thank someone who did such a thing for you? At the risk of his own life. Soon Ethan was transferred from the intensive care unit to a regular ward, but as a regular ward, to a separate room reserved for VIP patients. The man might have been more than happy to be with the other patients, to have someone to talk to. But James insisted on special conditions for the honored guest. Ethan didn't like being a patient, and the forced idleness was a burden. Probably that was why his recovery was going at a fast pace. The doctor wanted to get back to work, to his favorite business. His colleagues visited him, reported news, brought him treats. Margaret and her children appeared almost every day. The family realized that Ethan might not have died that night. There was even more chance of that than of being saved. The accident gave the relationship a special shade, united the spouses. In Margaret's eyes there was more love, tenderness, and it was pleasant, very pleasant. The mysterious savior did not appear. Ethan tried to find out about him from the policeman who came to take statements, asked his colleagues who had received him that fateful night, and even asked questions of the man who had caused the accident, the same kid who had come to him once to apologize. Shy, modest, nervous, with a weight of guilt on his fragile shoulders, but even this one could not say anything about the Savior, except that he drove up in an Infiniti and acted very quickly and decisively. He didn't just save you, he saved me. Without looking Ethan in the eye, the boy said, "If something had happened to you, something irreparable, I don't know how I would have lived with it." So if you see him, give him a big thank you from me." One day, the mysterious benefactor showed up on his own. James himself came by to warn Ethan. "Well, get ready. Here comes our hero." For some reason, he said in a whisper to a patient, a colleague, "Will you tell me later what's going on?" James left the room, and after a minute, the door was created, and a young man entered it with a broad step. A wide, white-toothed smile on his face, intelligent eyes, slightly wavy blonde hair, stylish, trim, some kind of radiant or what? Judging by his springy gait and muscles, visible even under his shirt, he is engaged in some kind of sport. That's why he managed to pull the victim out of the burning car. Moments later, Ethan noticed a detail that struck him to the core. The rescuer was holding a box of candy, his favorite. Once Ethan used to adore these sweets, but then the candy seems to have been discontinued. At least they had disappeared from the market. Where did this man find the box? And most importantly, how does he know that Ethan adores them and misses his favorite treat? It's just too weird to be a coincidence. "Hello." The visitor smiled, friendly and very, very warmly. "Afternoon." Ethan eyed his savior, someone he reminded him of. Perhaps they had met before. "It's quite possible. You know who I am?" "Of course, you're the one who saved my life." "Yes, I did. Whether it was an accident or not, who knows? But it was you who saved my life. You did it first." "What?" Ethan was trying to remember where he'd seen this man before. "I don't understand." "You don't remember?" The young man concluded and smiled. "That's not surprising. The last time I saw you was when I was just a kid. Daniel?" Ethan suddenly realized. How could he not have realized? The eyes, the hair, the intonation. Of course. "Daniel, is that really you?" "Yeah. Remember I promised I'd save you someday. You see, I kept my word. Tell me, what happened to you then after you were discharged?" Ethan asked. He was really interested in the fate of this orphanage boy, whom he had once seriously thought of taking into the family to bring up as a son. It turned out that Daniel was accepted to study at the very design center, where Ethan went to bother about him. Here, the boy's talent was immediately noticed and appreciated. With him engaged in the best teachers, his work was sent to all sorts of competitions, where they steadily took prizes. Daniel gained a certain popularity. Thanks to this, he was somehow respected in the orphanage. By the end of school, Daniel received several offers from the best architectural universities in the country. These institutions provided him with a dormitory and a scholarship just to get the coveted student. Daniel chose New York. Teachers from the Design Center, which had time for years of study to become a boy, almost native, said that there he has a better chance of success, and so it turned out. While still a student, Daniel became an employee of one of the largest architectural firms in the country. He started earning so much that within a year, he was able to save up for his own apartment. And then more. Daniel graduated from university and became the head of his department. His life changed completely. Money, expensive things, trips to expensive resorts. Daniel did not deny himself anything, and it was just wonderful. But most importantly, the guy was doing what he loved, what he really did well. Daniel enjoyed both the work and the result and felt really happy. Daniel never for a moment forgot about the person who first showed him concern. He knew perfectly well that Ethan had saved him twice, the first time on the night of admission, when he had refused to leave the bedside of a heavy patient and had noticed a seizure in time. The second time, the man had spent all his savings on medication for the orphaned orphan. Without expensive medication, Daniel would not have made it. The guy was clearly aware of this, But the doctor did not limit himself to the fulfillment of his official duties. He not only cured Daniel, not only gave him life, Ethan also believed in Daniel's talent and helped this gift to develop. Daniel still kept the construction kit he received from Ethan that Christmas. It was thanks to this set that the kid realized that architecture was really his calling. He spent hours and hours building amazing buildings, some of which he realized as an adult. I'm so happy for you, I really am. Ethan smiled. He looked at the young, confident man and couldn't believe it was Daniel, the same skinny teenager, abandoned, betrayed twice, wanted by no one. Joy and pride for Daniel, that's what Ethan felt as he looked at this man. Wow, he became such a successful architect, but most importantly, Daniel grew up kind, brave, determined, ready to help others. I always remembered about you and about my promise to help you, followed your fate. It seemed unfair to me that such a good man, a wonderful doctor, saving lives every day, lived like that. Daniel hesitated, afraid of offending his interlocutor, but Ethan smiled and finished the sentence. Lives in poverty. Well, almost. Wait, are you the mysterious sponsor who renovated my department? Yeah, nodded Daniel. I was literally pulled out of the grave in this ward once, and I wanted to thank you, especially since I have such an opportunity. It's my pleasure, really. Wow, I never would have guessed. Oh, and this Doctor of the Year contest, is that you too? Well, it's a state contest. I didn't invent it. And yet somehow you're involved in it. I can feel it. You've always had a very good intuition. Daniel smiled. Well, let's just say that I helped to get the contest organized in your town, and I asked the chief physician to nominate you. He said he was going to do it anyway, but I had nothing to do with you winning. I just gave my vote, the only one. The patients chose it themselves. I had no doubt it would work out that way. You are a wonderful doctor, humane, kind, not indifferent. This result is well-deserved. Wait, what about Mason, my son? I mean, the programming school, did you have a hand in that too? Ethan was struck by a new hunch. I did my best there, I'll admit. Quid pro quo. You helped me get a job at the design center, and that gave me my way in life, and I also helped your wonderful son. He's a smart kid, just a couple points short of the competition. I paid for all the years of tuition and asked it to tell you that there were budget places available. Ethan looked at the young man in surprise and remembered him as a small boy, thin, big-eyed, pale, almost merging with the hospital bedclothes in color. Now he was a strong, healthy man, successful, brave, kind. But why did he act so secretive? Why didn't he contact me himself directly? Well, Daniel hesitated. It's just that I know you very well. It would be awkward for you to accept this help. Maybe you'd approve a sponsorship for the department, but for yourself, I doubt it. Ethan thought for a moment. Daniel was right. He would probably be genuinely happy for his former patient, but he would probably refuse to help. The doctor was used to helping himself, but he'd never learned to accept support. And then there was that incident, the terrible one with you, the accident, and this time. This time it really was a coincidence. Amazing, marvelous, just unbelievable. At the same time as Ethan was coming home from the hospital, Daniel was driving to visit, quite by chance, an orphanage friend. He had just flown from the capital to his hometown and was rolling down a country highway. The accident happened before his eyes. The SUV lost control and literally swept a light sedan into the ditch. Daniel slowly pressed the brake. His car smoothly slowed down. The young architect watched in horror as the damaged car flew downward, flipping over the roof. While I parked, While I grabbed the necessary things, while I ran to the place, there was a fire starting. It was impossible to slow down. The driver of the SUV tried to help, but he was having no luck. He called for rescuers, only they wouldn't make it in time. Daniel struggled to pull Ethan out. He was already unconscious. At that moment, the guy didn't recognize his old friend and savior. The victim's face was covered with blood, but then when the victim of the accident was already taken away, the police came to the scene. It turned out that in the glove compartment of that half-burned car, there were documents in the name of Ethan. I just couldn't believe it. Daniel shared his impressions. It turns out that I really saved you, as I promised years ago. I still thank fate that I was driving behind you at that moment. It's an amazing coincidence. I've been following your fate for several years. I've been by your side. I've secretly helped you in any way I could, and it always seemed like it wasn't enough, and then this. If it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't be here. Ethan nodded. He was reliving the horror of the accident again, the horrible images coming before his eyes one after another, and once again Ethan realized how close he had been to death. It was an amazing feeling. Now the man appreciated every moment of life even more. And again, Daniel continued, "If you hadn't saved me then, many years ago, if you hadn't sat by the bedside of the orphanage patient at night, if you hadn't spent all your money on expensive medicine, if you hadn't, after all, bothered with this design center, then you wouldn't have been gone at night either." Amazing paradox of fate. A life for a life, it turns out. Ethan and Daniel talked for hours on end. The doctor was interested in learning as much as he could about the life of his longtime patient and now savior. The guy lived in the capital 4 years ago. He and his wife had a daughter, and then they took twins, a boy and a girl, from an orphanage. In general, the couple helped orphanages and boarding schools a lot, both financially and as volunteers. I remembered what you told me then. Daniel smiled. That time before you were discharged. What do you mean? Ethan shared, but he couldn't remember his admonition. You asked me to grow up healthy, to become a successful person, and to help those who need help. See, I'm good at that. Yeah, you sure are. It turns out that Daniel then fell into the heart of the doctor's words, and his whole life he built, trying to follow this instruction. A complete stranger turned out to be kind and attentive to Daniel. The boy didn't know that such a thing could happen, but he liked it. He liked it very much. He realized that there are good people in the world, and since then, he dreamed of growing up and becoming strong, to be able to support those who are weaker. I remembered you all the time, remembered our conversations, your care. I knew exactly who I owed my success to. But that's where you're wrong. I just noticed your talent and showed your drawings to whoever needed them, nothing more. But you did it, Daniel insisted. Everyone in the hospital and the orphanage saw my drawings, but you were the only one who decided that this talent was worthy of attention. Daniel left, but it was clear that now they would communicate, go sometimes to visit each other, correspond. There was some kind of connection between them, an invisible thread. Is it a joke to save each other's lives at different stages of life? You can't think of such a thing on purpose. Ethan felt warm and calm. He hadn't felt so peaceful and happy for a long time.
Lisa Lewin loved musicals. No, not the ones that directors were now stamping out, as if trying to plug plot holes with songs. She loved the Broadway masterpieces Cats, Les Miserables, Phantom of the Opera, West, Soviet History, My Fair Lady. Oh, how good they were. Lisa had watched them as a child and tears came to her eyes. She decided that she too would shine on stage. She would become an actress in such a musical, and her songs would touch people's hearts, making them laugh and cry. The childhood fantasy did not remain a dream. Lisa moved towards her goal, supported by her mom. At first, Lisa went to a private eminent vocal teacher. The girl was talented and did not waste her parents' money and the teacher's time in vain. Later, Lisa graduated from the Moscow Conservatory in pop singing. By this time, the young woman perfectly sang both classics and pop songs. She did not give up the idea of getting into a musical. The American production of Chicago was the one that impressed her the most. This musical was based on the true story of two celebrities. Ambitious risk-taking girls went to trial, but were acquitted, which gave a boost to the beginning of their careers. Lisa more than once imagined herself as a beautiful heroine, then Roxy Hart, then Willa Kelly. The woman even learned all the songs from there by heart. That she dreams of playing a prisoner, knew only one person in this world, which Lisa once trusted. I remember he even said she looked like Roxy Hart with her blonde curls, blue naive eyes, and a bull's eye counter. And so years later, Lisa was reminded of her dream again, only already in an ironic way. It's true what they say about being afraid of your dreams. For now, Lisa was in the main location of the musical Chicago in prison, only she didn't want to sing and dance. She wanted to cry nonstop. For a whole month that she was in the cell, the woman did not stop shedding tears into the pillow, unable to cope with the emotions that choked her at night. And what frightened the fragile blonde most of all was not the place she found herself in, but the fact that she was accused of something she had not done. Only no one in the world believed her. Now Lisa Lewin, nicknamed Candle by the local prisoners, stood in line for a meager breakfast. She already knew that she would limit herself to a slice of bread and butter, drinking tea without sugar. After all, the smell of oatmeal, which the cooks had managed to water down again, making it unsuitable for her stomach, was wafting throughout the dining room. Lisa knew in her mind that she needed to eat. She had lost 5 pounds in a month, and she was not particularly fat, having lost weight on the food here. As her neighbor Miranda Ogoniak, whose bunks were at the bottom, used to say. However, she had no appetite, and the presented dishes killed it altogether. "Make way and primary," muttered the blatant arrestee. Recognized by the local queen nicknamed Countess Camille, in addition to the beautiful tone pushed Lisa hard with her shoulder. She couldn't stand her left face, and the fact that the girl was from a good, even wealthy family. Lisa lowered her eyelashes and silently shunned, not intending to engage in a dialogue and come to an inevitable conflict, from which the loser will come out, taking her portion of gray, mush smeared on the plate. Lisa sat down in her seat, her cellmate sitting next to her, a former teacher already of Nancy's age. They called her Aunt Nancy or Mama Nancy and treated her with love. Opposite settled 2 girlfriends, the same Miranda Ogoniek, a sportswoman with a haircut under the boy, and next to a young Shaitan, who became a term for the fact that interrupted walking on the side of Muzhenko. The first days in the zone were given to Lewin Lisa with great difficulty. She remembered how it all began with the search, which was a total humiliation for her. The wardens did not demand nudity. They searched her hair, her mouth, made her bend over. Then the quarantine area. It was cold there, so we slept in beds 2 at a time. There was steam coming out of your mouth. The walls were scrolled with mats and prayers mixed in. Then prison began. Lisa was lucky to have a cell. The roommates were nice, though strange. At first, Lisa thought she would go crazy in captivity, however one gets used to it. Here, Lisa began to get used to the schedule, to the shouts of rising, to the local smells in the industrial rooms with barely warm water. Except that she still hated Thursday, which was known here as Naked Day. Then the door to the cell swung open, spreading all the shouting of the invigilator with "stripping all out, ladies." In this way, the administration checked if the prisoners had no marks from beatings, stains, infections, or fresh ones. Narcologist. Lisa was very helpful to Nancy. Lisa understood why she was fondly called Mom. The teacher treated the new girl like a daughter. The first night, as Lisa tried to muffle her sobs and sobbing with a pillow, Nancy got up from her seat and sat next to her. Lisa froze and then felt the older woman's hand touch her hair. She began to stroke her and softly sang a lullaby. To her voice, Lisa fell asleep. Later, Nancy taught Lisa the ins and outs of local life and the laws of the prison. Jenka joked that Nancy had been retrained from a schoolteacher to a guidance counselor. Nancy's aunt taught her that you should ask your relatives from prison for cigarettes in blocks. "I don't smoke at all," she was confused at the time. "You're doing the right thing." There's enough to ruin your health here. But cigarettes in the zone are analogous to currency, explained Nancy. Zhenka went further and for some reason told her cellmate something new. A few ways to make a shiv. I do not advise to use it, but for peace of mind means of protection should have. Only for the master should be better hidden. I mean, Oganik told it with inspiration, or they'll start a search. If they find something, the extra will be sent to solitary confinement. You can take a dip in the local suite there. I was only there for 3 days, we bit all our nails. And if the shift falls on Efremova, you'll forget. She likes to mock the wrongdoer. She says that's how she corrects us. She can strip us down to our underwear, pour water on us, and make us sleep on the bare, icy floor. From Joanna, Lisa also learned various words such as Shaheen Mar, chatter, kippish. All in all, Lisa's vocabulary had unwittingly been enriched. The main advice from the woman in the cell, however, was to stay out of the way. They meant Miranda, although they didn't like her themselves. Now Miranda stretched her neck and tried to see who was making breakfast. I knew it. Oh shit, the woman said. Shoving a spoonful of porridge into herself, wrinkling her nose, stopped. Eating. If you can't cook, then stay out of the kitchen. People have no conscience to feed slop. She can even spoil the water. Usually Lisa did not enter into conversation with her cellmates, immersed in her own thoughts. But today, however, she looked up from the bread, which she methodically decided instead of eating. How does one get into the kitchen there? She inquired. Through connections, of course. I got my place in the kitchen thanks to the Countess's patronage. Miranda lowered her voice and nodded at another table. Now our queen has her people everywhere, so she gets cakes and ingredients for porridge in the kitchen. She's got a sneaky one. You know what else she did? Messed up with our new security guard, Christopher. They clamp while everyone else is working. Now he's bringing his mistress all kinds of salts. She's got him all over the place. The worst thing is that he doesn't even realize the position he's in. If Katya opens her mouth and tells about their affair, he could be fired. If they believe him, of course. But who wouldn't believe the Countess? She can bring everyone to heel. What kind of bitch is she? Miranda's tone made it unclear whether she was jealous of the Countess's position, afraid of her, or admiring her. Lisa decided it was all of the above. I heard that the Countess had her eye on the new doctor and had forgotten all about Christopher. I didn't know it myself. But rumor has it that the new doctor, who's a handsome fellow, put her words in for the wretch. We girls don't usually like to complain about illnesses, because it's medicine that maims instead of cures. The last time Belikova complained about the pain of the experience, she had a tooth pulled. And what's wrong with that? Lisa quirked an eyebrow, not understanding where the logic broke down. Miranda and Bale glanced over and giggled, satisfied that they could retell a local joke. It wasn't like she'd had her teeth ripped out, and without anesthesia. So she had 2 teeth missing at once. Good thing it wasn't in the front. One good thing, she changed her nickname right away. Now Belikova is our shark. She'd be happy to ban Gamova. That's why we're in no hurry to get into the hospital wing. If you say you have a stomachache, they'll cut out your kidney. Only now there will be a queue of suffering people. It's been a long time since we've had handsome men, only in pictures. Have you seen them? And this one can touch you if you don't bring countesses to him. The first. The girls giggled. Aunt Nancy looked at them judgmentally. Lisa blushed. She was having trouble getting used to the words of the local lingo. The Countess's chesty laughter echoed through the dining room, which caught Miranda's attention again. Yes, our Countess needs everyone. A deck of trump cards is being assembled, poked a disgruntled light, porridge, and gnawed a piece of gray bread with exasperation. She knows how to twist her tail. If the Countess has an affair with the doctor, she will go to the infirmary like to a sanatorium, and then live on pills. Christopher can't cope with her demands, can he? Covenant was not surprised by such stories. She had already begun to get used to the local order and knew that many ladies from local prisoners have intimate relations with the prison staff. In this way, they hope to receive special treatment and relaxation during their sentences. She was also aware that the Countess is the chief of substances in the zone, except that the coveted medicines were not thrown over the fence and baked rolls were not handed to her. No bread. She used her employees for transit. You taking them in? Lisa heard the Countess was a former medical officer. She was serving time for selling counterfeit drugs and dealing in illegal substances. It was obvious that in prison she did not want to reform, but only improved her talents as a bargainer. Lisa involuntarily turned around and looked in the direction of the Countess. The prisoner was just behind Livis Courtling, and her minions were barely looking into the woman's mouth. Lisa thought that the Countess stood out very much from the rest of the prisoners. These women, though they tried to lid their eyes and lips, were still unconverted, menacing, somehow gray and unassuming. Their makeup reminded Lisa of a child's attempt at something that had fallen out of her mother's makeup bag. The Countess, on the other hand, was to match her nickname. Camille was tall, with fine facial features, a beautiful figure and soft-looking plump lips, which she painted every morning with scarlet lipstick. Except that these lips never smiled and all but slid teeth, and the look in her green eyes was evil, piercing, as if an X-ray machine was shining through. At some point, Lisa realized that this gaze was directed directly at her. The Countess raised her hand. It was Pyriev who ran his thumb along her throat, decorated with tattoos in the form of flowers. Caught Lisa turned pale and turned away abruptly, barely missing her nose, bumping into a plate of porridge. Miranda clucked her tongue. She loves you, I see. She's got you close to her heart. Why wouldn't you two have crossed paths on the outside? Maybe you spit in her food? Or ha ha ha. I loved Lisa. Shook your head. No, I don't know her. I don't know why she's always clinging. The girl admitted bitterly. The Countess had been giving Lisa a hard time ever since she arrived at the prison. She bullied, teased the prisoner, forced her to exhaust herself at work in the sewing shop, working above the norm. She also demanded money from Lisa for amenities for her own cell, citing that the inmates are wealthy parents who own a chain of restaurants. Lisa advised these Nancy did not argue with the Countess, even shared the contents of her gear with her a couple of times with cosmetics, cigarettes, and provisions. Lisa hoped that the Count, having failed to fight back, would back off. Then Lisa couldn't stand one incident. It happened a week ago. The Countess, having learned that Lisa was a singer, ordered her to be dragged to her cell by her lackeys. There, the Countess, sitting businesslike on a thin, throne-like chair, ordered Lisa to climb on a stool and sing songs for her and her guests. Lisa refused to fulfill the role of court jester. She did not give in even when Shmeleva, the Countess's right hand, painfully grabbed her by the hair and repeated the order. The Countess considered Lisa's stubbornness to be a spit in the face, so she set out to spoil Lewin's life. She began by doing just that, and she ran over a woman. When Lisa was dragged into the cell that night and thrown to the floor, Nancy Soap's teacher came to her. Cleaned her up, shook her head, and asked, couldn't Lisa just sing? Lisa remained silent. She hates Vanessa because she saw a competitor in her. Christina willingly shared her thoughts, insisting the flash drive to her neighbor. Lisa, you're a beauty. Christopher can't take his eyes off her. In fact, all the men around here look at her when she walks by. Even her grandfather, even though he hasn't had a hard-on in years. Then there's Lisa, the rich actress who was in the papers. Of course she's jealous. What do you say, Lisa? Lou and Miranda winked merrily. It's on the Countess's, boys. I'm not interested in men. Lisa hastily blurted out, but remembering the rumors about women's colonies, fearfully added women too. I've just been burned twice by relationships, and I don't intend to have any more. Lisa wasn't lying about her determination. Her first love had broken the girl's heart with a whimper. Her second love, in which she was just looking for an opportunity to forget herself, had sent the prisoner to jail. They announced the end of breakfast and allowed them to go out for a walk in honor of the day off. Lisa was just waiting for this opportunity to take a breath of air and look at the sun. She wanted to get up, but a hand came down on her shoulders, forcing her to sit down abruptly. Stove, mole. Why haven't you eaten? The Countess's hushed voice stitched, making Lisa covered in goosebumps. Not to the taste of our exquisite dishes. I'm not hungry, whispered Lisa, trying not to look into the face of her mother, whom she sincerely feared. Maybe you don't like the way my friends cook? Katya insisted. You're used to foie gras and champagne for breakfast. Star Miranda, leave the girl alone. Nancy spoke up. There's nothing to share. The teacher was one of the few people the Countess had any respect for, whether because of her age or because the teacher reminded the prisoner of her mother. However, now the woman did not want to back down either. "I'm just worried Aunt Nancy has relaxed." "Count. She has become pale, thin, does not eat at all. And now the bowl of porridge is full. Not a spoonful has our princess sat down." Lisa, throwing back her head, looked into the woman's green eyes. Suddenly to herself, Lisa felt anger rising through her. It rose from her stomach and hit the blood in her head. "Why are you so interested in my plate?" she asked before she could take a bite. "You want to finish your tongue for me? Don't be shy. Tell me, am I not greedy? If you need to donate something, also come." She loudly ahed, whispered barely audible. "What a fool!" The others murmured. The Countess staggered for a brief moment of astonished rebuff and silence. She quickly pulled herself together, however. Lisa did not realize at what moment the bunny grabbed her by the hair and with a sharp movement pushed her face into the bowl of porridge. Oatmeal flew up her nose in a flash. Behind molding eyes, Lisa opened her mouth to take a breath, but the Countess didn't let her off the hook. Like a cat, she lunged at the singer. "Bitch," she sang out. "You still don't realize where you are. You're nobody here. So don't open your mouth in the wrong place." Lisa, whose vision was still obstructed from the mush on her face by the tire lash, tried to fight back by touch. However, the singer was hard to resist. Aggressive ex-bunnies. "You make up your mind. What should I do, silence or sing songs?" growled Lisa irritably. Fractured more and more. She'd only been in jail a month, but she'd learned things, like how to show her teeth. Lisa fiercely wiped the cold mush off her face, looked in the reddened face of the Countess, who was dragged away. Usually at this point, the bunny was already being stretched by the workers, except that Christopher the newcomer did not risk prying into her mistress. "I tolerated being measured next to her." "Can you even sing?" howled the Count. "The first read an article about you. They say you poisoned a talented girl because you couldn't do a damn thing yourself. She sang for you. That's what they say." "And your family? Did she get money for it? Rich people can do anything, but it's a surprise, Major. We're all equal here. You're just like us. Heart in your chest." Lisa pounded furiously, sending hot, lava-like blood through her body. It rushed to her throat. Lisa didn't notice as she opened her mouth and sang. She sang hotly, passionately, as if she were on stage in the middle of a play. The bunnies, amazed, froze when they heard how beautiful it was, filled with emotion and color in the prisoners' voices. Lisa, on the other hand, looked into the eyes of therapist Kuchka, who even had her mouth ajar. Lewin's eyes read the self-confidence she had been hiding before. "Morning, give me hope. I want to run after my dreams again, just like before." Lisa sang the words of the song that first came to her mind, Happiness from the musical Cats. When she finished, there was a strange silence, like in the hall during a play. Except that the artist was not expecting applause. "I'm better than you. And it's not even about the money," whispered Lisa at the end of her solo. She realized that she had made a fatal mistake. The Countess's nostrils flared. She lunged at her rival like a wildcat again. They tumbled onto the table, sweeping away the remains of their plates. Miranda winced with fright. Nancy was begging the girls to get back together. Only now the warden's whistles sounded. The Countess, covering the curse, was pulled away from the heavy breathers. Lewin, someone touched the face of Weather the Covenants, and she saw Christopher in front of her. "Are you all right, Lewin?" he asked with genuine concern. Lisa nodded confusedly. "I'm fine." However, the guard frowned, noticing the scratches on the girl's face. They counted and answered. "I'll take you to the infirmary," he said, helping her up and holding her elbow. "Stop." The car rumbled, the harshest of the wardens down. "Ifremuva, where is the instigator?" "It was not her fault," said Christopher confidently. The Count pounced on her. "I saw it." The Countess, who was already being led out of the dining room, taking under white hands, turned sharply. Only she did not look at Christopher, that she was betrayed by Liza. It was the look that made Lewin's knees buckle. "What have I done? Idiot." The woman thought fearfully. At the hospital, Lisa followed the man on automatic. She didn't understand why he was being so kind, but she sensed that the guard's attentions would still bode trouble for her. When Lewin was brought to the medical wing, she was still in shock. Lisa had never been in a fight in her life, though more than a few bruises and abrasions. She was afraid of what she would answer for her stroppiness. "Sit here, Lewin. The doctor will be here in a moment," the guard said and touched Lisa's shoulder one last time. She tried not to twitch at his touch, though she was sure the man had held his hand too long. As Christopher walked out, Lisa heard his voice in the hallway. "Brought you a patient." "You should be careful there. She has a pretty face, you can't spoil it. We don't have many of those around here. And she sings like she gives me goosebumps," he said, whistling as he walked away. Lisa felt sick. Of course, all singers dream of recognition, but she didn't want that kind of attention. She lowered her face, hiding it behind her hair, which her adversary had sung to properly ruffle and whip into a crow's nest. She heard the doctor enter the office, then froze. A few more cautious steps in her direction, and then a short, like a heartbeat, Lisa. Barely did the woman hear the doctor's voice as her heart did, a somersault jumping up into her throat. She threw her head back, deciding that the rumor had played tricks on her. But then her eyesight was also in cahoots with him, failing her. For in front of her stood most definitely the man she had abandoned before her wedding. "What are you doing here?" she murmured, looking at the man with horror. Then, as if remembering that she had a prosecutor's mess in her tangled hair and was wearing a prison uniform, she turned away abruptly. Blushing thickly, Lisa clenched her teeth, ashamed of her position and appearance. "Amazing Lisa," she thought bitterly. "Have you found a way to surprise your first love?" Stephen looked beautiful, as handsome and statuesque as ever. It was not for nothing that the prisoners were as excited as if a fox had been let into the henhouse. It made Lisa feel even worse. "What happened?" asked the man. He came closer and leaned over to look at the patient. Of course, Lisa was going to go out of pride, but she couldn't. She was tired. And did she have the right to disobey the doctor? Stephen began to treat the wounds. His movements were gentle and careful. The man worked in silence. Lisa did not know where to look and finally looked at his face. "What are you doing here?" she asked, unable to stand the silence. "You used to work at the family clinic." Stephen looked briefly into her eyes. "I think your answer to that question would be much more interesting than mine," the doctor said reasonably. "How did you get here, Lisa?" Lisa shouted, "Didn't you read the papers?" "I poisoned my rival." Her husband's mistress, Lisa involuntarily snarled. Stephen, however, surprised her with a new question. "If I wanted to talk to journalists, I wouldn't be here, Lisa," he said. "What really happened?" Lisa looked at him with astonishment, but still with force. "Language." "You won't believe me," the prisoner said bitterly. No one did. Stephen's hand froze. Then he threw away the vodka, flushed with blood. "Why are you like this?" Again he tried to make a dialogue. "Him." "For the pretty eyes," Lisa mumbled, not knowing what to say. Unexpectedly, Stephen smiled at her. "Then the occasion was a good one," the doctor remarked, sticking a band-aid on the patient's cheekbones. Lisa's heart clenched, then fluttered with a caught bird. She stared into her ex-fiancé's face, unwilling to look away. Stephen froze as well. It seemed that Stephen wanted to say something else, but Christopher returned to the office. He looked at both of them and said grudgingly, "That's enough, prisoner. It's time to go to the cell." On the way to the cell, Christopher struck up a conversation with Lisa. Although the woman was more silent, he hinted that he could make her life in prison easier. The man seemed to believe in himself when he contacted the Countess. Lisa, however, was not listening to him. Stephen's face stood before her eyes. She could still feel the man's cold fingers touching her face. While he was treating the scratches, Lisa suddenly realized that the usually collected Stephen had forgotten to put on his gloves. Whether from confusion or excitement, the thought made the warm woman furtively smile. All day Lisa had been diligently pushing away thoughts of Stephen and the past that bound them together, the wedding that never happened, the love that ended in her tears. The woman tried to distract herself, but as soon as the lights were turned off and the cell was silent, the memories came flooding back. There was no escape from them. Lisa sighed resignedly and turned on her side, covering her eyes. She thought about what had started only 3 years ago, though it seemed to her that the events were in a past life. Lisa had met Stephen while watching an old musical. They ended up in adjacent seats in the old movie theater. It was January, snowy, fabulous. During these days of the New Year's holidays, the Dawn movie theater was hosting an old movie marathon. Lisa adored this cinema, old and cozy. It had only 2 halls, but it had stayed afloat for what must have been half a century. Despite the fact that they had built multiplexes in nearby shopping centers, but in its heyday they decided to bribe the public with other things. For example, the floors with nightly screenings of classic movies, 1 ticket for a ball, catchy umbrellas, please, 5th row in the middle. Lisa asked the cashier. As she made her way to the movie rooms, Lisa saw that there weren't many people who wanted to watch the musical for a sleepover. 2 couples had taken kissing seats in the back row of everyone on either side of the auditorium. Obviously, they would be preoccupied with each other and not the pictures on the screen. A company of 4 girls and giggled softly. Elsewhere in the hall, Lisa had taken her place in the center and intended to be busy watching trailers and eating popcorn. However, as soon as the hall fell into a pleasant darkness, someone sat down next to her. Lisa, of course. Vita glanced at the person who had few empty seats. She didn't take a handful of air corn to her mouth because she was dumbfounded. The young man looked as if he had stepped out of a Hollywood movie screen in the light that poured from the screen, his face as pale as marble. A flash on the screen picked out a pronounced lip line, cheekbones, a shadow, and a downward address. Then everything faded again, plunging the viewers into darkness. However, Lisa could no longer take her eyes off her neighbor, and the man who had so unceremoniously violated her personal space was Stephen. Soon he would become her boyfriend, then her fiancé, and then he would break her heart into shards. But at this moment, the girl didn't know the future, she only saw his profile. Suddenly, Stephen turned to face her and looked directly into her eyes, smiling openly as if they were longtime friends. The screen there noticed he jabbed a finger toward the screen where the trailers were spinning. "Or I'm more interesting." Lisa blinked, startled, and twitched, turning sharply, scattering sweet ship popcorn all over the floor of the movie theater. A wormy, reddened neck. The girl squinted at the stranger, who looked extremely pleased. It was just interesting to see a person who in a huge empty hall decided to find a neighbor. "Why did you sit here?" Out of embarrassment, Lisa immediately went on the offense. Because 2 lonely people shouldn't sit in different corners of the theater, especially when they're watching an old musical. "It's not healthy. I'm telling you as a doctor," he responded, not the least bit embarrassed at the stranger. "What makes you think I'm single?" "Maybe I'm waiting for a boyfriend." Lisa was indignant, blushing. Stefanova looked into her eyes again. A slight, charming smile was on his lips. If he lets such a charming girl wait for him, what kind of guy is he? He raised an eyebrow. Lisa tried to sneer some more. However, she soon gave up. The onslaught of the guy's insolent charm and his imperturbability. Soon the young people were already discussing the movie, joking and eating popcorn, losing it from their buckets. A friend of a friend, apparently, and he assured that the best thing is to eat 2 kinds at the same time, a combination of sweet and salty. "It's a perfect pairing," he remarked, stealing his neighbor handfuls of ship's snacks. "So not only are you a doctor, but you're also a foodie." "Lisa, why didn't you buy both flavors then?" "I was hoping to meet the sweet popcorn man, and I wasn't wrong." He winked at Lisa, causing her to flush again. Maybe it was fate when their fingers made contact on the popcorn bucket. The girl felt a flock of butterflies circling in her stomach, tickling her ribs with their thin wings. She didn't think she'd ever felt it before. After the movie, the young people walked the city streets, drinking cocoa, until dawn painted the high-rise buildings in shades of orange and pink. Lisa thought that it had been a long time since she had laughed for so long that even her stomach ached and tears ran to her eyes every now and then. Stephen was incredibly easy for her to be with. She felt as if she could talk to him about anything, as if he were a random fellow traveler on a train she would never see again. She did not realize at what point she had time to tell the guy that she dreamed of playing a major role in the musical Chicago. And when she told him that her birth father had died in a car accident and her mom had married her best friend, which became her stepfather, Stephen was also candid. He turned out to be a young, aspiring doctor. He told Lisa that the idea of becoming a doctor came from his parents, whom he respected immensely and did not want to disappoint. Stephen also had a younger sister, Molly, whom everyone called Molly for some reason. Lisa did not understand why this beautiful, sweet girl took the name of the famous demon from the myths. However, she soon realized that such a name is just right. Fits the twosome and the girl. Lisa was enchanted by Stephen at first sight. In love. From the second date, she introduced her boyfriend to her mother and stepfather. A month into the relationship, her parents accepted the potential son-in-law as their own son. And Lisa's younger brother, Jenka, adored Steven. Of course, when Steven, after a year of relationship, got down on one knee and proposed marriage, Lisa Summer did not think over the answer. A confident, full of happiness, yes came off her lips. She hugged her fiancé without noticing the change in his gaze. And so the big day had come. Lisa and Steven were to be married. The guests were already wandering around the country mansion, rented for the whole weekend. The registry clerk stood at the arch and discussed the nuances of the ceremony with the organizer. Yes, it was here, by the silvery lake, stroked by white-pink lilies floating in the water. Lisa and Steven decided to marry and take a vow of love and fidelity. Lisa, picking up her skirt, ran down the hall. She had a sly smile on her lips. She had escaped from the supervision of her bridesmaids and mother. She kept her course for the room reserved for the groom to steal a kiss from him before the ceremony began. Lisa didn't believe in omens, so the thought of the groom seeing her before the wedding in the bride's white dress didn't scare her. She really wanted to see her lover and future husband. Except that barely the girl, having enlisted, ran to the right door, behind which the future husband was hiding. She was forced to feel the influence of omens. The bride's slender fingers touched the round knob, but she did not turn it at once. The bride froze as she heard the argument outside the door. "You have no right to give up," the girl said. "Steven, you must see it through." "Isn't that what you're a naive fool for?" "Don't say that about Lisa," asked Steven. "What, Steven, have you forgotten who she is? You've forgotten who she is? You've forgotten who's really always been on your side. You have to tell her the truth. Leave her at the altar, make her suffer for yourself, for your mother's memory." "Have you forgotten?" "Of course not. I just can't, Molly, you can't." "Then I will. Let's see if she'll be just as in love with you if she finds out the whole truth about us without giving herself credit." Lisa yanked open the door, swinging it open. Behind her she saw Steven and Molly. The brother held his sister by the arm, hovering over her. "Lisa, I won't say anything for," growled Steven in a tone that Lisa had never heard from him before. "And you understand me too?" Everything changed. Molly shielded her eyes, but then her gaze darted behind her fiancé's back. At first she was surprised, but then her beautiful lips stretched into a satisfied chuckle. "Too late, kin," she declared, pulling her arm out of her older brother's grasp. Steven turned around sharply at the entrance. When he spotted the bride frozen there in her splendor, he was dazed for a moment, at first struck by the beauty of his beloved, who was like the lower snowdrop flower that first emerged from the frozen ground after Earth's winter. Thin, pale, fragile, trembling in the wind. But was there still hope for warmth in those who spotted it? It did not take Steven long, however, to admire Lisa's beauty. He noticed with what horror she was looking at him. "How much have you heard?" He exhaled, frightened. It didn't matter how much she had heard. What mattered was how much she had to learn. Molly giggled, peeking out from behind the man's shoulder. Lisa had a smug look on her face, like a cat with a lunging canary. Molly leaned defiantly on her brother's shoulder, keeping her gaze on Lisa. The brunette pulled up and whispered something in his ear. He grimaced, trying to pull away. "Steven," whispered the bride, confused, frightened. "What's going on? What's going on between you two?" "Listen, Lisa." The man rushed toward her, but Lisa was in a hurry. "No. Don't touch me. I want to know first. Tell her," exclaimed Molly with her hands. Her black eyes sparkled and a mocking smile appeared on her lips. She must know the truth. "You love her, don't you? Since you're so good, here's no need to start your marriage with lies." "Dear little brother." "Shut up, Molly." Steven snapped at her. Lisa felt a crust of ice forming inside her. This thin ice seemed to break with every breath she took. Built. The babies fit into her lungs from the inside out. The bride put a hand to her rib cage because the physical were real, not phantom. The corset seemed too tight for her. There wasn't enough air. "Lisa, have you gone pale?" scared Steven, taking a step toward her. One more attempt to touch the bride. "No. Don't touch me," repeated Lisa years ago. "Speak." Of course, in the girl's mind already makeup to make the explanation horrible and hurtful must be. Molly was not his sister. They'd been cheating on her, having an affair behind her back all this time. Gross. That's so gross. "What are you two?" lovers, the white bride to herself. A silence hung, broken by the woman's hysterically obnoxious laughter. Molly wiped a tear from the corner of her eye before replying. "You'd like it better, baby." Trying to catch her breath, she said. Such words confused Lisa even more. She looked confusedly into Stephen's face, which appeared lost. Finishing it, demanded Molly abruptly cut short her own mirth. Then she, high-heeled, left the room. The bride and groom were left alone. Lisa was looking into her lover's face. He, on the contrary, averted his gaze. "It will be a long and unpleasant conversation," Stephen said, looking out of the window. "We can postpone it. I beg you." "No," Lisa shook her head emphatically, clenching her fists and shifting the folds of the delicate fabric in her fingers. "Tell me what she meant." Stephen licked his lips, then hooked his fingers into his hair, just perfectly styled. Resolved, the man straightened his shoulders and looked into his bride's face with a heavy Kyrie look. Lisa didn't like the eye. It did not bode well. "You promise me you'll listen to the end and try to understand me without jumping to conclusions. You're in no position to set conditions." Lisa's mouth batted, but once again, at Stephen's struggling look, she nodded reluctantly. "Okay, I'm listening." Her heart was pounding as fast as if she were rolling in a roller coaster car. And she had no idea if the next second would be a rise, a fall, or icy water. "Our meeting was no accident," Stephen said in a tone devoid of emotion, as if you were reading me an interesting story. "Then in the movie theater, I didn't just sit next to you. I knew your name, I knew your habits, all your friends, the things you like. Autumn more than any other season. What kind of coffee do you drink? Pumpkin latte in cold weather and coffee with orange juice in the heat. Knew all of them. I followed you to that movie theater too, knowing how much you loved that movie. But if you hadn't come that night, I would have found another way to meet you." "But why?" Lisa whispered as the silence dragged on. Stephen looked into her eyes with a short grin that had too much sadness in it. "You do realize why, don't you? To get us here." He spread his hands, glancing around the beautiful room, "so that you'd fall in love with me as hard as you could. To agree to marry me." Everything the groom told her further reminded Lisa of a terrible nightmare, not a harsh reality. Stephen had come into Lisa's life to ruin it. He had taken on the ridiculous role of avenger, blaming her for sins she had not committed. "Remember you told me about your father and his tragic death?" Stephen said softly, as if it hurt to force the words out of his throat. "You said he was in the car with another woman. But I left out one important detail. She was his mistress, right?" "How do you know?" whispered Lisa, who had actually kept such an embarrassing truth from her fiancé's family. Her dad had died in a traffic accident and her mistress was sitting next to him. Her mom, upon learning of this, was almost depressed. At once, two news about the death and betrayal of her husband knocked the air out of her lungs. However, next to her all the time was Vadim's best friend, who in the future became Lisa's stepfather. The man supported them, protected them. Over time, they tried to forget about the past. However, it knocked on the door again, and it was done by someone from whom Lisa did not expect it. Stephen looked into Lisa's face before he shocked her with the truth. Her name was Svetlana, and she was my mom. Lisa let out a convulsive sigh, her eyes widened with shock. Stephen, however, did not finish his confession. "Did you know that our parents were in accidents for a reason? Your father was a dishonest man who built his business on blood. His competitors decided to get rid of him." He looked into Lisa's eyes. "It was a contract killing. Your company was taken away from you right away, remember? Except it was your father who had to suffer, not my mother. She was a woman in love, and a naive fool. But people shouldn't die for that, you know?" Stephen took a couple of steps to the window, looking outside. The guests were already seated on beautiful white chairs decorated with ribbons. The bridesmaids were handing out ice-colored confetti for the guests to shower on the newlyweds. Live music was playing. Guests drank champagne and enjoyed desserts and appetizers in anticipation of the holiday. However, this celebration seemed unreal to Lisa, as if it was not a couple of steps away from them, but in another world. Lisa looked at Stephen's profile. She remembered the first time she saw him and fell in love. Just like that, at first sight, like in ridiculous novels. She felt Stephen had not finished his confession, and she was right. After the truth about my mother's affair came out, My father lost his peace and sanity, Stephen pronounced, indifferently looking at the beautifully dressed guests' flashing smiles. My mother was an artist of the night, creative. Like a brightly colored bird, she could wake up in the middle of the night and paint the walls in the hallway because inspiration struck her. Mom always smelled like paint and her beautiful hands were dirty. Dad was a down-to-earth man, an ordinary mechanic who smelled of fuel oil. However, he adored his wife more than anything else in the world. They were happy, as I remember. And then when Mom was gone, he lost the meaning of life. Later, he read her diaries. She wrote about her lover and how he wouldn't let her leave. Your father threatened her, you know. Stephen rubbed his lips and continued. Dad was angry and heartbroken. He started drinking his anger and he took his pain out on me. You know, I'm a lot like Dad. The only thing I got from my mother was my eyes. But he wouldn't see it that way. He shouted in my face, sputtering, nauseated, greasy saliva and breathing booze, that I was not his son. He convinced me that my mother had me on the side. He abused me every single day. Chased me out of the house, even in the cold, with no clothes on. When Daddy was sober, he would hold me, rocking me like a baby, crawling on his lap, crying, begging me to forgive him. And then it would happen all over again. I was living in hell, and to be honest, I looked at my dad's face, which used to always glow and smile, but I didn't recognize him. I thought my dad was gone, and someone else had taken his place, like a demon that possessed people. Stephen shook his head, and the corner of his lip quivered as if he wanted to. He grinned at the childish fantasy, but he couldn't. Later, one of the neighbors called the child welfare authorities. They came for me, but I did not want to leave. I remember that I cried and touched them, but they took me away. At first I lived in the hospital. A psychologist was in constant contact with me. Then I was sent to an orphanage. My father was forbidden to see me. They said he was a bad influence on me. I think that's what the psychologist decided. I fought a lot and was withdrawn. And then when my dad lost everything, well, he was gone too. They found him in my mom's workshop. Me? I'm sorry. Lisa struggled to hold back the sobs that burst from his chest. But tell me, was it my fault? What did you want to do to me, Stephen? Stephen shook his head. I don't know, Lisa, he admitted honestly. Your father set it all in motion, you know. He started it first. Pulled the card out of the paper house of someone else's happiness, making it crumble. I hated him my whole life. I couldn't hate my father. Molly him my mother. She shouldn't have died. I couldn't take revenge on your father, but I could on his daughter. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, trying to comprehend what she was hearing. Stephen continued in a tone devoid of color. I didn't decide to do it right away, though. I tried to forget honestly, tried to live another life. I even had the perfect chance to do so. I was adopted by the Plotnikov family. Their adult children are rarely taken home. I didn't expect such a miracle, but I was lucky enough to end up in a hospital. John came there on business. I don't know why he liked me, but the doctor's heart went out to me. He and Adriana adopted me. They couldn't have children, but when I ended up in their home, Adriana found out she was pregnant. I remember when they told me they were expecting a baby, I went to the nursery and started packing. When John and Adriana came in, they were genuinely surprised, asking where I was going. I replied that they didn't need someone else's baby now that they were expecting their own. And then she cried and started hugging me. You know, they're great parents. However, I never got to call them mom and dad. I didn't want to betray my own parents. He rubbed his forehead as if hoping to smooth out the wrinkles. I began to live a fake, puppet life, as if I were playing someone else's role, Stephen confessed, remembering his past. In general, I was just trying to repay the family that had taken me in, to justify their trust, so I was the perfect big brother to Molly. For Adriana and John, I tried to be a model son, became captain of the soccer team, graduated high school with a gold medal, then enrolled in medical school to work at John's clinic. But you and your family never left my mind. I couldn't find happiness in anything, you know. Yet I honestly tried to forget about it, to put you all out of my mind, until I went to one damn concert. Lisa looked into her fiancé's face, met his gaze. He was devastated, doomed. I saw you on stage. You were performing at a student celebration, singing songs from Romeo and Juliet, standing in a black dress. Its shiny fabric glowed like the scales of a fish in the spotlight. I recognized you immediately because I've followed your family's life at times. From that moment on, something inside me snapped, broke. I started thinking about you all the time. Stephen exhaled hotly. I started looking for information about you. That's when I found out you were studying to be a singer. Found out that your mother was happily in her second marriage, that you had a younger brother. I found out you own a chain of restaurants. Thanks to what? Damn it, Lisa, I became obsessed with you, you know. After what I'd been through, I thought you had no right to be happy. I wanted to do something to get back at you. And when I gave everything to Molly, she convinced me that the best revenge for a girl is to break her heart, to dump her in front of everyone at the wedding. Lisa turned pale. Realizing what awaited her, she felt sick and dizzy, so she abruptly rested her hand against the wall. Stephen, shifting in his face, rushed to his bride's aid. Lisa, are you okay? Are you kidding me? She shrieked. Ari, how can I be okay after what I've heard? You lied to me, you always have. Then Molly's face appeared before Lisa's eyes, smirking. So you're step-siblings then? Lisa asked, feeling like a fool. If she was interested in such questions after such revelations, she wasn't looking at you like a brother, Stephen. The man was embarrassed. There's nothing between us. She's my sister, nothing more. He denied Lisa's conjecture. I wasn't going to bring Molly into this, but she and I have been close since she was born, so there are no secrets. She was helping me. Molly loves too much. Intrigue and romance. I told her today that things have changed. I can't do that to you. Only Molly was hit by a car, a spoiled girl. She didn't accept that outcome. That's what you saw. I can't believe it, whispered Lisa, fighting the incoming nausea. Blood pounded in her head. Her pulse pounded in her temples. You may not believe me, but now looking back, I began to realize why I was obsessed with you. You blinded me when you stood on stage. You made my head spin. I fell in love with you, Lisa, I swear. Stephen passionately confessed his feelings. I fell in love at first sight, but I knew I had no right to feel that way about the daughter of my worst enemy. I began to hate myself for my weakness, to despise myself. I thought I was weak, so I decided to prove that I was stronger than such emotions. I thought I was doing the right thing, that I'd feel better if I made you just as miserable. Then everything would be fair. Well, whispered Lisa, struggling to manage the dizziness and stand up straight. You've done it. Bravo. Did you make it? Stephen. A look of despair appeared on the groom's face. You promised to listen to me to the end. He exclaimed. Everything had changed. Lisa, I really did love you with all my heart. Only Lisa didn't believe him anymore. She shook her head, taking her heart from the so sweet and desirable words of the man she had come to love. It turns out I don't know you. Stephen, if our first meeting was a carefully planned performance, how much truth was there in your words, your promises, our relationship? No, the man I fell in love with, he would never do that. She turned away, wanting to leave this room as quickly as possible, to get that idiotic dress off. Stephen, however, rushed toward the bride and grabbed her arm, yanking her toward him. Lisa had unable to steady herself on her thin heels. Her back hit the groom's chest, and he immediately hugged her tightly from his soft arm, as if he'd walked into a trap. No, please, I beg you, give me a chance. Yes, it all started with a lie. If it hadn't, I would have met you in a different way, Lisa. I love you. Do you hear me? I love you. Lisa's heart clenched. Stephen's hands trembled. Lisa didn't want to show him her tears. Now, however, she couldn't stand it. Hot, large drops slid down her cheeks, smearing her mascara and blush. She remembered when the makeup artist had conjured up Lisa's face this morning like a fairy godmother. She'd remarked that a bride's makeup had to be durable to withstand many tears of happiness. Obviously, with tears. Grief, disappointment. The makeup was impossible to fight. Let go, horse, uttered the girl with a clap of her hands. The men only squeezed harder against her chest with their backs. Lisa could feel Stephen's heart beating hard, as if it were ready to jump out, to burst through his chest. How she wanted to believe him, but she couldn't. Let go. She yelled with a shriek, coming forward. She managed to break free of the groom's grip, but the bride got tangled in the hem of her dress, falling to the floor. Stephen rushed to her, but Lisa, already openly sobbing, screamed in his face, "Stop, don't touch me, go away. I don't want to see you ever again. It's over, do you hear me? It's over." Stephen leaned toward her, opened his mouth and said, "Wake up." The warder yelled without hitting the cell door, "Wake up and you'll be tucked in." Lisa opened her eyes abruptly, popping up on the bed. Nancy looked at her in surprise and, seeing that arrogant, tear-wet face, shook her head regretfully. Lisa hastily wiped away her tears, muttered and guiltily, "I had a bad dream." The teacher did not comment on it. Lisa got up from her seat to start a new day, as gray as all the previous ones. At breakfast, she noticed the inmates squinting at her and whispering. She understood why this was happening. The Countess was not at breakfast, and Lisa turned to Miranda softly. "What about the Count?" Miranda, having almost entirely stuffed a boiled egg into her mouth, waved her hand, inhaling while she and Efrimov were sent to the isolation ward for fighting. "Christopher stood up for you." Voices, apparently, "Put the catcher," grumbled, and she with a stuffed mouth. "What happens when the Count comes out? I don't know. Pray, prepare your shiv, as I taught you." Lisa turned pale and pushed the buckwheat porridge away with trembling hands. However, this time Nancy moved the plate back. She looked at Lisa sternly. "What a mess. Eat, come on." She was right about one thing. Your skin and bones left to gain strength. They'll come in handy. Another week, which the Count spent in solitary confinement, passed quietly. Lisa kept hoping to see Stephen again, but the doctor never showed up. When Miranda came out, Lisa thought that she would immediately attack her. However, the Count now avoided fighting in public. Another week passed, which seemed to be the calm before the storm. One Saturday before the fight, Aunt Nancy approached Lisa with a request. "Blue, we can swap with the schoolboys for the night." Lisa was surprised and shrugged her shoulders. "Why not?" "Only why would you want to?" "Mine isn't the least bit more comfortable. It sags at the bottom like a hammock. I have to measure in a certain position to fall asleep," the woman admitted. "That's all right." Nancy waved her hand, smiling gently. "Just want to sleep there tonight. Give it a try." "Old, I've got a quirk already. I feel like the air has a cold pull on my side." Then the teacher lowered her voice and, leaning closer to Lisa, added, "Yes, and God, they say, is always fidgeting over me. No strength. She's restless. Squeaks and squeaks. Maybe you can handle her a little easier." Lisa didn't argue. She was in a wonderful mood. Today was bath day. The water was almost hot. Lisa could relax and wash away her fatigue. Oh, and they said there would be a doctor's checkup tomorrow. Lewin couldn't wait to meet Stephen. She felt ridiculous, but she'd even borrowed some lip gloss and mascara from Ogniak, intending to put on makeup before her visit to the infirmary. Katya didn't touch her, which was a relief. The only problem was Christopher wouldn't let her go. Lisa, getting ready for bed, brushed her long blonde curls and hummed a song. Nancy looked at her and suggested, "You could have your hair braided. I haven't done it in a long time." Lisa smiled broadly, "Sure." She sat down on the floor next to the bed. "Aunt Nancy." The older woman's hands began to pull the strands, weaving them together. Lisa covered her eyes in pleasure. Nancy, on the other hand, suddenly said, "You know, Lisa, I haven't told you why I'm sitting here, and not many people know. Everyone only guesses and scratches their tongues. I've heard all sorts of things about myself from the locals. You want to know the truth?" "Sure." Lisa nodded, surprised by this revelation. "I had a daughter named Wendy. Did you know she looked just like you? Look at her." The woman, holding Lisa's hair with one hand, reached under her pillow and pulled out a photograph. She held it out. Lisa saw a smiling young girl. It seemed to be a student, or even a high school student. Except that Lisa couldn't find any common features between them. Except that her hair was the same long, blonde color. "Beautiful," Lisa smiled. The girl's mother smiled softly, too. The picture was mint-salted. It was obvious that the photo was often held in their hands. "No longer is she my Galushka," Nancy quietly confessed. Though Lisa already understood what the woman was getting at. Hearing the pain in her words was hard. And knowing that the cute little girl from the photo was no longer living was hard, too. "I'm sorry," Lisa said, gently tucking the picture back in its place. "Children shouldn't have to leave us." Nancy sighed heavily and nodded. Wendy wanted to be an elementary school teacher. Did she like children? She was like me. I used to take her to school with me a lot. She used to sit in the back because her husband was away on business. So she liked it, Nancy told me as she styled Lisa's hair. She got into the institute on a budget. When they went to celebrate, they got her drunk. Drunk exactly I had her myself, a girl simple, honest, naive. A major there abused her. Lisa shuddered involuntarily. Nancy continued, when my daughter came home, I'd already alerted the police, the neighbors. I'd never seen her late before. And then she didn't even call. My heart was troubled, even though the police said that the student had been out on a bender. Then the woman overshadowed Vasha, then came back in the morning. I didn't recognize the Valentine then. Her dress was torn. She came barefoot, her feet chipped by a road stone. Her hair. What did I do to her before I left? I was upset. She looked at me without emotion, didn't cry, even told me everything straight. And you know you had the same eyes when you first came in here? Empty, scary. Nancy let out another long breath. Her voice trembled. It must have been a long time since she'd shared her story with anyone. We tried to bring the major to justice. It was a nightmare. He assured us, and his friends were pushing him, that Vasya had jumped into his arms herself, that she herself had been drinking, that she herself had started the whole thing, so that the money of passion in the institute would make fun of her, mocked her, said that it was her own fault. Aunt Nancy interrupted the story. I've finished with your hair. Lisa turned to face her, touched her hands to her hair, which the woman had poured into something intricate. Thank you, Aunt Nancy, she smiled. The woman sat down for a moment, seeing Lisa's face, which was now no longer hidden by her long hair. She touched her cheek with tenderness as well. Her fingers trembled. Do you really look like her? But you're stronger. You'll get through this. No matter how much you're hurt, don't give up on the blue, she said emphatically. Then her gaze abruptly faded, lost its luster. My daughter couldn't handle the pressure. She couldn't handle the shame. She left me a farewell letter, apologizing. Then they found her body in the river. Lisa felt Nancy's pain as her own. She reached forward and gently put her arms around the woman's narrow shoulders. Nancy lowered her head gratefully. The perpetrator of all this came to me then, asking me what I wanted for my silence. And I wanted only one thing, that my daughter should live longer. I would have given my life for it. Only he couldn't fulfill my wish. How did you end up here? Did you do something to him? Lisa wondered. Aunt Nancy grinned slyly. You know there is no dirtier person than an angry mother. Next, did you get it right? I was disillusioned with justice and decided to settle the score with my own hands. Except all I wanted was a confession, you know. But when I went to him, this guy, he laughed at me. And at my Golubkina too. God rest her soul. Then I couldn't stand it and pushed him through the open window. He crawled out of the second floor, only he survived. I still ended up in here for attempted murder. His father hired the best lawyers to hide me. Lisa shook her head, thinking how unfair the world was. Nancy, meanwhile, took her daughter's picture in her hands, stroked it with her fingers. I couldn't save my daughter. I might at least save another poor soul, muttered the woman, looking at the photo. She hastily wiped her tears, fearing they would drip on the photo. And what about your husband? Remembered another character in Lisa's story. He's waiting for me. The old stump, Nancy said fondly. He writes letters. She says he won't die until we see each other. Lisa smiled. She thought that her spouse had not been spoiled with attention this month, although Lisa didn't expect a letter from him, unless it was the divorce papers. The idyll between Nancy and Lisa was interrupted by the voice of Ogniak, who returned to their cell. Holy shit, Maxim, exclaimed Miranda, seeing Lisa's hairdo. Nancy's mom, I want a beauty like that too. Your hair is short. I can only put a bow on top, the woman said with a good-natured smile. Miranda started to laugh jokingly. Lisa looked in her pocket at the mirror for the first time. She smiled, noticing how beautiful Nancy's hands had made her. Aunt Nancy, can you plate me tomorrow too? Lisa blurted out involuntarily before the doctor's examination. Nancy suddenly laughed with the answer. Miranda sputtered. Why are you getting ready for a date with a doctor like that? Primary joined her with suspicion. Luckily for Lisa, they announced it was time to call it quits. Although Oganek flicked her neighbor on the nose, she promised to return to this interesting topic. At night, Lisa fell asleep on Nancy's bed with her hand tucked under her pillow. She felt the rectangle of the photo with her fingers and realized that the woman had left a picture of her daughter. Lisa felt immensely sorry for the girl and her mother, yet she still felt a kind of mental uplift. She thought for the first time that her life was going to work out. With these thoughts, she fell asleep. In the middle of the night, Lisa woke up to a strange noise. Her sleep was still responsive in a place that was foreign to her. The woman opened her eyes. The cell was dark, but she caught shadows, as if someone was moving. At first, she thought Miranda or Bale stood up. Then there was a whisper, but the voices were foreign forces. "Keep your mouth shut so you don't take any chances." Groaning, footsteps, the creak of springs quelled. A groan of pain, another. All this Lisa at first took as part of a dream, stubbornly unwilling to wake up. It was the woman who had put everything to sleep. "Yes," answered she, so sang her beauty. And then Lewin was struck on the head as if by a blow. She jumped up sharply in her seat, looking after the people who were leaving their cell, and hurried to lock the door behind them. "Stop," she shouted. Hearing her stranger's voice, everyone dropped and rushed on. Lost to the smart hallway, Lisa threw off the blanket, rushing to Nancy's bed. She touched her shoulder, turning her toward her. Nancy's aunt called out. She was beginning to shake with fright. "Aunt Nancy." The woman didn't answer. In the darkness, Lisa's hand felt something hot and sticky. She squealed and then yelled, "Miranda, Christina, get up." Lisa rushed to the door, pounding on the bars with her bare hands. "Security, security. We need a doctor. We need a doctor now." There was an uproar. The lights came on. There was a rush. Lisa sat on the floor of the cell, shaking with terror. She was looking at the pale Nancy. She noticed now that her hair, usually gathered, was loose. This was how Lisa of color had slept. The woman was wearing a warm touloup, which helped a little to protect her from her attackers. An investigation began. Lisa was questioned more than once, but she answered only what she knew. She did not give the names of those she suspected. Miranda and Christina forbade her to talk about it. Her friends that night slapped Lewin's cheek so hard it hurt, and they demanded, "Don't you dare knock. Do you hear me? Don't talk about the Countess." "How could I?" Lisa argued, clenching her shaking hands into a fist. There, Nancy. Nancy's mother lay in your place because she knew about the plans of those skins before anyone else," Miranda parried, looking hard into Lisa's eyes. "Make sure her sacrifice is not in vain. I see they're a key somewhere on the ball. Not enough for you. You want to walk out of here with your feet up?" Lisa didn't want to. Now she was really afraid. Miranda count. How the 2 days passed, Lisa didn't remember. She was afraid of everything. She even slept with one eye open. Miranda and Bale had taken pity on her and started to be on duty in her cell so she could get some sleep. Lisa didn't understand why they were so kind, but she was grateful. On the third day, during a walk, Lisa was approached by the man she had dreamed of seeing. Stephen walked briskly across the site and nodded to Lisa. "Lewin, come with me. All the tests were taken on Sunday." "Did you testify?" "No, lazy. I have to close my charts," said the doctor in a deliberately businesslike tone. Under the stares of strangers, he led Lisa into the building. "Would you have sent someone else?" she said reproachfully. "My life is not easy enough as it is. And when you're seen with you, I'm a mess." "Is Nancy awake?" Stephen interrupted her. "Thought you'd want to see her." She asked and caught you. She nodded, averting her gaze. They hurried to the medical wing. There the woman rushed to the bed on which a pale Nancy lay. Lisa took her hand, pressed that one to her lips. "How are you?" "I'm fine. We were lucky with the doctor. He's got the best hands. I don't know how he got here." Nancy looked at Stephen with a bright smile. He, coughing, tactfully said, "I'll leave you to it." Lisa asked the patient, "Why did you do that?" "They came to see me," she said bitterly. "That's why I decided to do it. I heard them discussing their outing. They wouldn't just leave me alone. I know they will now. But we should have asked the guards for help." Nancy smiled. "Do you still believe in their help?" The older woman said bitterly, "You are a bright soul, Lisa." A lump appeared in Lisa's throat. She squeezed the woman's hand tighter. "Didn't I tell you how I came to be here?" she whispered. "Would you like to hear my version, not the one in the papers?" Nancy nodded. "You don't have to, but I want to," insisted Lisa and licked her lips. "Trying to get my thoughts together so you can understand me. I'll start from afar. I was once madly in love. This man was my first true love. However, his feelings turned out to be. Then my heart was broken. The pain of it was so intense that I made the huge mistake of rushing into the arms of the first person who opened his arms for me, comforting me. I don't know if I wanted revenge on my ex-fiancé or to save myself, but I did what I did." Nancy weakly squeezed Nancy's fingers as if comforting. Lisa continued. "Robert was a friend of mine. We'd known each other since we were students at the Art Institute. He became a young and successful director, directing plays, operas, musicals. And I was a singer, but I dreamed of playing in a musical. Of course, I always saw him as a friend. I didn't like him at all. I guess that's why I paid the price. I thought if my mom could find comfort with her friend, so could I. Like they say, you'll always love him. But I never did." Nancy listened attentively, though Lisa realized that her stories were confusing and incomprehensible. She took a breath, however, and continued more measuredly. "I married Robert right after the wedding went off. It was only a month, and I still remember the strange sensation when I kissed him for the first time. I could feel his lips, his hands, his breath. But at the same time, my soul was silent. Like a lady not eating, my heart wasn't fluttering. There were no butterflies in my stomach. I knew he loved me. I let him. I didn't cheat. I didn't hurt him, but he still only got worse around me," Lisa confessed. "One day I got the lead role in his new musical. The critics predicted it would be a furor. There was also a lot of gossip that I became a prima donna because I was the director's wife. But that wasn't true. I prepared for the performance by giving myself to the stage. I felt like the stage was the only thing I had left. That's when I met Vanessa Alford, a girl who loved my husband much more than I did." In telling her story to Nancy, Lisa herself replayed these events in her head. She remembered Vanessa's face so naive, like a child's huge blue eyes, curved eyelashes, blonde hair the color of wheat, thin arms. She looked like an angel. Vanessa was from an esteemed family. Her parents were hereditary aristocrats. The girl became Lisa's understudy. She would play the lead in a musical if something happened to Lisa. However, Lisa sincerely believed that there was no enmity between them. On that unfortunate day, during the dress rehearsal, Vanessa complained of a sore throat in the dressing room. Lisa offered her tea, which she prepared herself. In such cases, Vanessa drank the drink. Soon the girl was hospitalized, diagnosed with poisoning. Suspicion, of course, fell on Lisa. At first, few people believed it. However, soon the details became clear. It turned out that Vanessa and Robert were lovers. The man, however, was not going to leave his wife for Vanessa. They continued the affair behind her back, staying in the theater longer than the others, locked in the dressing room. Lisa was the only one who didn't notice. She didn't notice her husband at all. Of course, members of the media clung to such a savory news as a tidbit. They began to make conjectures, bringing them one on top of the other. It was said that Vanessa's voice was used by Lisa to make her way on stage. The big news, however, was Vanessa and Robert's affair. They decided that the woman had taken out a stage rival and a rival in love. At first, Lisa believed that everything would be resolved peacefully, but already at the trial, she faced the harsh reality and betrayal. "How did poison end up in your injuries?" Vanessa's lawyer, hired by her parents, asked. "I don't. My honor always rests on a shelf in the shared dressing room." "Anyone could have," she muttered confusedly. "Why didn't you have tea yourself that evening?" he added. "You love it, don't you?" "But I did drink it," insisted Lisa with a frown. "If you had been drinking, you would have been lying in the next bunk with Vanessa." They were warming the bench, cheekily the defense attorney, trying to piss Lewin off. Later, Vanessa and the other girls from the theater testified. That's when Lisa realized she'd been wasting her time paying attention to anyone but. She had made enemies and envious people. They blatantly lied, accusing Lisa of hating Vanessa. I remember during rehearsal, she pushed Vanessa, and she nearly fell into the orchestra pit, the girl remarked. Lisa gasped. Actually, she rushed over to Alice to keep her from falling. The girl tripped during the dance rehearsal and lost her balance. Vanessa asked not to tell anyone about this unfortunate misunderstanding, so that she would not be removed from the role of understudy. Lisa had no idea what kindness would come out of it, and what rumors were floating around the theater. However, Lisa believed to the last that she would not be judged, except that Vanessa's parents turned out to have many more connections than the Lewin family. As a result, she ended up behind bars. "What about your husband?" Nancy asked. "Did your husband end up not believing you?" "I see he doesn't come to see you. It's just my mom who brings the parcels." "Robert said something during the trial that really got to me," Lisa admitted at the end. "He said I would never poison Vanessa out of jealousy, because I never loved him. But out of jealousy of the scene one could." Then he looked me in the eyes and I realized how much pain and anger there was in him. He was angry because I couldn't love him and throw him out of my heart. First love, he hated that about me, so he decided that no one should get me. "And here I am alone." "You are not alone," smiled Nancy. She then began to fall asleep under the influence of the medication given by the doctor. Stephen was standing next to Lisa. She realized that he was listening to everything, but she didn't worry about it. It was even easier. "Is she going to be all right?" Lisa asked. She'd been wandering around all night with a fever. A scratch at that age can be fatal. "But Nancy's all right. She's hanging in there. Of course, we'd better get her to a hospital." "Who'd let her?" "She's lucky she thought to put on a jacket. The knife missed her, though the blow was severe. No major organs were hit." Lisa turned to Stephen. He was standing in a white doctor's coat with his hands in his pockets. Lisa didn't mean to, but smiled as if to an old friend. The handsome face of her former lover was like a ray of light in this dark, gloomy realm. Stephen, however, didn't smile back. "You need to get out of here. There's no telling how many more attempts there will be to get rid of you. Nancy told me everything." Earl's inmate was more than a little angry. She blackmailed Christopher for another page to get a duplicate key to your cell. That kind of attitude is scary. "Nancy thinks someone's hired you." The case involves more than a little bit of Lisa Poe's detainee animosity. "Easy for you to say. Are you suggesting I spoon dig?" He shook his head, then sat down in front of Lisa and took her hands in his. Lisa flinched, but didn't take her palms away. Her body felt as if an electric shock had gone through her. "Listen carefully. We're going to help you." "Okay, I got you out of here. But this will only be the beginning. You have to prove your innocence. You can't hide forever." "Can I? I don't know," mumbled Lisa, blushing. Stephen's fingers stroked her palms, making the butterflies that had long since slept, if not died, flutter again. "Do you trust me?" he asked insistently. "I have a choice of allies here, a few," Lisa replied, lowering her gaze. "Especially those who are skillful at revenge." Stephen smiled, then sushi. During the night, Lisa started moaning, so much so that Jenka woke up. She climbed down from her skates, tired of listening to her friend's sobs. "What's wrong with you? God forbid you get stabbed. Does your stomach hurt? No strength?" "I'm sorry," Lisa sang. She'd been a performer in a musical, but she was doing great now. Miranda touched her face. It was wet. Her hair stuck to her suits. Lisa had washed with soda water before. A doctor was called. Lisa was taken to the infirmary. And there began the scariest part of the plan for the girl. Stephen explained that they would not let her go to the clinic so easily, so the man diagnosed her and made a cut on her stomach. And then what was the floor for? Only then did the doctor call the warden. "Look, I did the best I could under these conditions." He demonstrated the scar. "However, she needs full treatment and urgently. Otherwise, I'll have to write to the highest authority." There's a lot of noise around her. The supervisor shrugged her lips. "I can't. Let me take her to my father's clinic to fix her up. We'll have her back in a week," Stephen suggested. "We'll do it quietly." For a while, the boss was still resistant. But Stephen was too charming a man. A man like that, a woman could never refuse a request. And so Lisa found herself in a spacious ward under supervision. Stephen came to see her the next day. "There's a guard on duty at the entrance. He will leave in 1 hour exactly," he announced, handing her a medical gown. "Change and leave. There will be a black car waiting for you." Lisa did not argue. She realized it was better to trust Stephen completely and go with the flow. When the girl pulled the robe on, he turned away. She only grinned when she was done with changing clothes. Lisa turned to the savior. "Thank you." He turned around, shook his head. "It's too early to say thank you. When are we all done? Who are we?" The woman frowned, unaware that someone else had been privy to the plans. The man grinned. "You'll find out." At the appointed time, Lisa ran out of the hospital and into the car that was waiting for her. She literally fell into the back seat, gasping with excitement. What a spectacular appearance. "You're definitely an entertainer, not a circus performer," poked the girl driver and hit the gas pedal. Lisa looked out from behind the seat and marveled. "You?" Molly glanced in the rearview mirrors. "Who were you hoping to see?" "Vin Diesel from Fast and Furious." "But forgive me graciously that your precious ass isn't being saved by him." "Why aren't you helping them?" "You," Molly marveled. "Self-importance. Actually, I'm helping my big brother." "I thought you looked at him differently," Lisa grudgingly admitted. Molly, entering the corner abruptly, poked loudly. "You have too rich an imagination. I just saw the way he fought back when you ran away from the wedding and disappeared for a month. He told you you were an idiot, and you came back with a ring on your finger without giving him a chance. At first I was glad. I thought he'd get over it, forget about you. But it wasn't happening. Stephen just got worse and worse, not realizing what he saw in you. But my brother loves you, so he got a job in circulation to keep an idiotic eye on you." Lisa's lips trembled with the urge to reply to Molly that she loved her brother too. But Lisa clenched her teeth, realizing that Molly wasn't the one who needed to hear those words. "He's gone to jail." "Because of me?" she interjected. Molly rolled her beautiful eyes. "And you think he just decided to change jobs, so to speak?" "The man got tired of the big money in the private clinic. He wanted a thrill. Are you really that naive, or are you just kidding?" Lisa pressed her palms to her face. She even agonized thinking about Stephen. "You didn't relax too much there." Molly pulled her out of the house. "You're staying with me for a while. Stephen, you don't want to draw attention to yourself. And then we have to figure out how to get justice. You can't always be in hiding. It's one way to change your name, though. Did the exterior go to Cuba?" "No," Lisa cut her off decisively. "I know what I want to do. Will you help me?" Molly grinned, asking. Vanessa Alfort walked backstage at the theater. The girl had not been here before so deafeningly she bit her lips nervously. Tonight, after rehearsal was over, she had received a bouquet of scarlet roses and a strange letter that had been left in the dressing room. She didn't believe Lisa had written it, but who else would know about her affairs? There was only one line, a quote from a musical. "If you lead them on by the nose, they don't realize you're cheap." And a place and time where they'd be waiting for her. And Lisa's signature. Vanessa looked around, but no one was there. Then she heard a rustle, then juice, 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 a woman's heels and silence. Vanessa got angry. "Well, who's here?" "This isn't funny," she declared. She heard a woman's laughter in response. The acoustics of the stage from, and the specialty artists. Couldn't hear a word coming from the audience, but they could hear each other perfectly. Vanessa realized that the sender of the letter was somewhere nearby, but it was too dark. "Come here," she sighed at the letter. "What is the meaning of this? Who gave you the right?" A click. A spot of soft light appeared on the stage. Vanessa Glass stepped out there, then took a step back. The letter fell out of her trembling hand. Standing on the stage was Lisa, dressed as the main character in the one whose role Vanessa had taken from her. She smiled haughtily and stared into Vanessa Alfort's face. Shaking. "What are you doing? Why are you here? You're supposed to be in jail. Why do you think the innocent should be behind bars?" Lisa grinned, taking a step forward. The singer moved gracefully, smoothly, as if she were swimming toward the victorious Vanessa. "They let you go," Alfort whispered. "Maybe," Lisa shrugged. "Or maybe I escaped to meet you in person. You know, prison taught me a few things, like how to fight back. Want me to show you? Stay away from me." Waze chased Foxy down the fall. "What do you want?" Lisa shook her head. "Were you shaking like that?" However, at the trial lied, confidently hid her tears in a handkerchief. "You weren't even afraid to drink poison just to get rid of me?" "That was a risky move." Then why are you so afraid of me now? Then Lisa stretched his lips in a crazy grin. I get it. Do you understand what I want to do? You feel you don't have much left. I got nothing left to lose. I'm going back behind bars anyway. Only this time for real crimes, not your fairy tale. What? Vanessa stammered, looking up at the woman looming over her. What are you up to? Lisa raised the hand she had been hiding in the folds of her dress. Vanessa clapped, yelped, and seeing the gun, Lisa pointed it at the girl. No, don't, I beg you. I'll do anything you want. Alfort cried. Lisa pretended to think about it. Then she nodded. I want to hear the truth. Then I'll probably give you a chance, or at least two, counting to 10 before I pull the trigger. Vanessa, punctuated by wet palms against the stage floor, slid under her elbows, nodded. Okay. She screamed hysterically. I'll tell you everything. Yes, I drank the poison myself. After we had tea, I put it in your warnig. What was I supposed to do? Robert only had eyes for you, and you raised us. I loved him. You had everything I wanted, you know? Everything. A man's main role. Glory, pay attention, and instead of getting the lead by working hard, you decided to push me around. Wouldn't it have been easier to poison me and go to jail? Poked Vanessa angrily. Look down. No, I wanted you to suffer, right, and then disappear. That's why I even paid those idiot newspapermen to be here. Vanessa ahead, realizing she had sold too much. Lisa was also surprised to learn that hating the Countess was the motive. Did you order my death? She asked deafeningly. Do you realize that another person suffered instead of me? A beautiful woman. Her blood is on your hands. Vanessa loudly cried. Clutching her hands into her hair, she shrank into a ball. Lisa became disgusted. She understood that Vanessa was a spoiled, arrogant girl, the favorite of rich parents. She could only think of herself. Lisa took the gun off the safety. Vanessa jumped like a hare when she heard the hunter. That you promised. I lied, Lisa replied dryly and pulled the trigger. Vanessa screamed, but nothing happened. She gingerly opened her eyes and looked at Lisa, who grinned and said bang. Vanessa had no sooner opened her mouth than she heard a popping sound. The backstage area behind where the women were standing began to rise. There were more claps. They turned into a flurry of applause. Vanessa was startled to see that there were many spectators to their conversation. Even Robert was among them. It turned out that the man had believed the naive girl Vanessa too, but now he had learned the truth. Lisa threw a gun at her feet, which turned out to be a fake. You wanted the lead role? Enjoy, she said, and then retreated away. She found Stephen standing in the shadows. He was picking up the backstage area and watching the woman with a burning gaze. Lisa hurried toward him, faltering in her stride, not saying a word. She threw herself around his neck and pressed her lips to his. Barely breaking the kiss, the woman whispered fervently, I love you. I'm sorry for everything, I love you so much. Stephen smiled, and you forgive me, my love. Then Lisa had a hard time. After all, she had escaped from prison. But Vanessa's confession and witness testimony played their part. The charges against her were dropped. She apologized. Aunt Nancy was soon released from the colony. Her beloved husband Lisa was waiting for her on the outside, who made a decision to help the old people in everything and provide them with a happy old age. Lisa's life took a new turn. She was now afraid of little and tried to live life to the fullest. You never know when you might be put behind bars. Lisa, now Lisa, was playing in Broadway musicals, just like she'd dreamed of as a child. This is her song. People laughed and cried ironically, but like the heroines of Chicago, she became famous and popular after the prison story. Today, however, 5 years after leaving prison, Lisa had her final role on stage waiting for her. After all, she recently found out that she is expecting a baby with her beloved husband, Stephen. Therefore, the singer decided to take time out in her career, because family was more important to her than anything else in this world. Yes, the love of Stephen Lisa began with deception. However, it passed all the tests. It ended by becoming simplistic and selfless. It's the kind of love you sing songs about, make movies about. Maybe someday they'll make a musical.